Hello everyone, Gary here from timelineastrology.com. This is the sign-based forecast for March 2024. But before we get into the signs, I want to remind you that I use the sidereal calculation, so you will have to subtract 23 or 24 degrees from your tropical signs to arrive at your sidereal signs. That most often means moving back signs. So whether it's your rising sign, moon sign, sun sign, whatever perspective you're looking at this from, subtract 23 or 24 degrees and you'll get your sidereal chart. I recommend usually starting with your rising sign, then the moon sign, and then the sun sign in that order. And I do that because rising sign shows your physical space. It literally shows where are these transits impacting you in your life physically. There's no sort of like wondering about, oh, how this might play out in terms of how I feel about these things or what may happen in a sort of more abstract sort of way. This is more tangible. Now, you could also, if you want to become even more tangible, if you know, have more advanced astrology, Vedic astrology emphasizes the Arudas, the Padas they're called. And this is a separate thing. It's based on the rising sign and also the planet that rules the rising sign. And it calculates another ascendant based on how far from the rising sign the planet has gone. And then you basically count from your rising sign to the planet that rules your rising sign, and the same again. And that new ascendant shows more tangible results. And you can look at that sign as well to see what's going on in terms of these transits. But to make it simple in the beginning, it's probably best just to look at your rising sign and see where in physical space all of these transits are impacting you. Then add on your moon sign if you're proficient at that. The moon sign shows more about how you feel about what's happening, but also to a degree shows what you're making happen because the moon shows your likes and dislikes. And it will obviously show what you want to make happen, and you can make happen to some degree, depending on, of course, all the other things that are going on in your physical space and etc., all the other layers in your chart. And then the sun sign, the third one, I would add. So they are the three, rising, moon, and sun. And if you can add the fourth, the Pada or Arudha Lagna is called in Indian astrology, to see more tangible results related to these transits, then go for it. So let's get on with it. Let's get into the first sign, and that is Aries. So for Aries rising and or moon sign, we're going to look at Aries and its ruling planet Mars. So Mars for Aries is in its exaltation at this time. It has been for the last few weeks. It continues for the first couple of weeks of March. So it's moving towards its exaltation degree by the end of Capricorn. It's very powerful, your ruler now, Aries. This is more positive, obviously, because when you feel powerful, when you feel exalted, you're feeling very dignified, you're more likely to express your more dignified self, and you might feel very confident in what you're doing, and especially what you're doing, because this is the 10th whole sign for you, Aries. So Mars in your 10th sign not only is a very powerful position by sign, but it's also by house, 10th house. Mars does well in the 10th house because it's all about taking action. So I imagine that you're feeling very positive about action that you're taking. Now, it isn't that there aren't some caveats here. There are always caveats every single month, every single day. There's always something else going on that you have to navigate. So one of the things you might have to navigate here, of course, is the strength of Saturn, which is ruling Mars, and Saturn continues through your 11th whole sign and aspects your sign. And in fact, you've got all of the what are called the malefics, the cruel planets, Mars, Saturn, and Rahu, all aspecting Aries, your sign. So you're obviously feeling a lot of all of that energy. Now, that could be in a way like when the going gets tough, right? The tough get going. This could make you feel like more spurred on, in fact. And especially with Mars, your ruler aspecting your sign from the 10th house sign, you're probably a bit gung-ho about doing something now. But with Saturn and Rahu both aspecting also, it's obviously necessary to be more mindful of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and to make sure that you're not overdoing it. So Mars creates accidents, for example, when we overdo it, and Saturn's combined aspect is asking you to slow down at the same time. And this kind of push-pull, which is essentially what Mars and Saturn is. Mars is the push, Saturn is the pull back. Okay, let's stop there. Let's not go too far. Mars keeps pushing you though. This push-pull of Mars and Saturn obviously could create tension in you. And that could literally be the case if this is your rising sign, Aries. This could be physical tension. like literally in the muscles, because Mars rules the nervous system, the nerves, according to Indian astrology, and Saturn rules the muscle, the worker of the chart. And so the nerve and the muscle kind of have to work together, obviously, for you to be able to do anything effectively. But this could be, again, this push pull where you're feeling a lot of tension and you don't know where to put all of this energy. And it's like it's not coming out necessarily cleanly. It's got this kind of restraint that is involved here as well. So, Aries, this is just something to be mindful of, I would say, for especially the first couple of weeks of the month. Mars is conjunct Venus, your seventh lord, as you can see here. Venus, Mars, and Pluto all conjoined in February. That's been an interesting dynamic. I'm sure you've had some interesting relationship dynamics going on, Aries. And because, of course, Venus is not just about relationships, generally it's specifically the partner, the seventh house lord for you, as well as the second. So family relationships and romantic relationships and business partnerships, all of these things are being impacted now by Venus-Mars conjunction again with Pluto. This could be a lot of power struggles that you're going through. And it's also in your 10th house. So it could be in work situations. So being really mindful in any kind of relationships at work, business, partnerships, general relationships at work could be really affected by this power dynamic, power struggle that's going on that nobody is really saying anything about potentially, but you still have to deal with it. It's there, everybody feels it, you sense it, and it's kind of like maybe not spoken of, but you have to deal with it. And together with the Saturn ruling all of these planets in your 11th sign of groups, of networks, of associations, if any kind of group dynamic, any kind of, even if it's just a friends group, Saturn in the 11th conjunct the Sun by the end of February, but continues into the beginning of March, as well as Mercury. This is kind of like, again, a more tense situation. So we have the push pull of Mars, Saturn, but now we also have this sort of push pull of Saturn, Sun into the beginning of March. And again, this might feel a bit tense. And the Sun, your fifth lord, if you have children, it could be there. So there could be some tension between children and friends. There could be some just general, confusion maybe about your own direction in life as well, and what you're gaining from what you're doing and what you want to do. What you want to do more especially because the Sun rules your fifth. Any kind of creative outlet could be challenged here. You might be challenged to be clear about how you're expressing yourself creatively and again with children. But the fifth house is also about any kind of planning that you are having to do for your future now, and the 11th sign also. So this fifth sign is like the thing you would really love to do, whereas the 11th sign is like, the higher ambitions, and it's like all of the people that are involved in this thing that you would love to do. It's like a bigger project, right? The fifth house is more personal, 11th is more like a big project thing. So thinking about gains in general, I would say will be a big theme with the Sun moving through your 11th sign for the first couple of weeks of the month before it enters your 12th sign by the mid-month. And at that point, obviously, this journey from the 11th to the 12th is the case now for the next few weeks into April, especially with the eclipse in your 11th or in your 12th sign. This journey from Aquarius into Pisces is about gains and losses. It's about ambitions and surrendering those ambitions to actually gain something. Because, at the end of the day, if you don't allow things to like flow as they're meant to, and you're trying to have things work out a certain way, sometimes you can actually impede the flow and actually prevent things from happening. And this is one of the big lessons I feel you're going to have in the next few weeks, Aries, especially leading into the end of March and the eclipse that occurs on March 25th in your sixth whole sign. And then the following eclipse in your 12th whole sign in Pisces, that total solar eclipse on April 8th. We're heading into this period now, obviously, of change and having to loosen up some things here that are not easily loosened, because this 6th and 12th house activations in your chart, Aries, is quite a challenging one to kind of let go of, because it's all about being on it and being very focused and deliberate and making things happen. And then on the other side, it's like just letting go, going with the flow, surrendering everything that you're doing. And so you might be challenged to let go a little more, to surrender more. And in a way, surrender isn't a choice. So it's just something that you eventually come by, where just as sleep every night, you just, allow yourself to fall asleep. You don't try hard to sleep. There's a need to kind of let go a little more here. And of course, because the North Node Rahu is in your 12th house where the eclipse happens in April, this is where you're really being asked to focus on in a more positive way. And because its conjunction with Neptune is there, and its ruler of Pisces, Jupiter, is running through your sign still, and it's going to conjoin Uranus by April as well. We're heading into this conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus in your sign. Then obviously this is a time to really sort of find a balance between all of this kind of doing and letting go, and then finding yourself in that kind of mix. So finding a more balance between these states of, trying hard and making lots of effort and doing lots, and letting go and allowing things to happen. And so this is gonna be a big theme moving into April as well, but I'm mentioning it now in March because it's going to really have a big impact in March as well with the eclipses starting up. So I'll show you first of all the new moon. And let me go let me go back first of all to this moon here. This is the new moon in your 11th house sign. So the new moon in Aquarius on the 10th of March. This is obviously, like any new moon, a reset point, and this is a time to reset your intentions, and intentions especially because it's 11th sign and it's all about your wishes and ambitions, your higher ambitions. Venus, you can see here, has joined the new moon, your 7th lord, so relationships, partners are getting involved here, family as well, all kind of combined here, and money issues as well, all combined in, okay, this is what I want to achieve, this is my ambition here. So there's something that has to be worked out here. You can see Mars is moving towards its exaltation degree, very powerful indeed. Mercury has slipped into Pisces at this point. And again, this is another reason why the eclipses at this time into end of March and April is more complex in a way for you to be able to let go of the details. Because not only do we have eclipse in Virgo, your 6th sign, of the details, the everyday stuff that you have to do, and then the 12th house where Mercury is placed in debilitation, like swimming around, not really knowing what to do and being overwhelmed with all the details that are coming out of here, all of the changes that are happening, the subtle changes perhaps many times, but still lots of change going on, and you're not maybe clear about how to progress. And then on top of all of that, by April, we're going to add in a Mercury retrograde. So March, and especially into the end of March, and I'll show you the eclipse here by the end of March on the 25th. This is again in your 6th whole sign in Virgo, the South Node Ketu. There's something to drop here in a way as well. Something's not working. It's obviously not working now, and so it's a good idea to kind of maybe just drop that. And then with Mercury, the ruler of that opposite, about to move into your sign in Pisces now, but about to move into your sign really the day after the eclipse, if you see here, by the 26th of March, it moves into your sign. But then it's going to start to slow down. Then it's going to retrograde by the 1st of April, and then retrograde back until the 25th of April, and we'll conjoin Rahu again. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of give and take, there's a lot of things you have to let go of, and striving for a kind of doing and being perfect in what you're doing is probably not going to work out so well. There's a need to find a balance with that and just letting go and surrendering. Mars at this point also has moved into your 11th sign and will conjoin Saturn, and leading up to that eclipse in your 12th sign will exactly conjoin Saturn almost by degree. So this is leading to a tense situation. It's kind of like you're being squeezed here. There's some issues to hear around finances, work, and expenditure. There's some issues here about letting go of the details, the finer print, but at the same time not like avoiding the issues, and dealing with the issues, and dealing with some issue here with the 6th house. Could be like a debt, a health issue, a work issue, a day-to-day routine that you have to do, but again, try not to get so bogged down in that you're losing the bigger picture. And as you can see, this is a bit of a kind of conundrum that you're entering here, Aries, and this is a time to be really mindful of that into the end of March and beginning of April for the eclipses. Keep an open mind, try not to push too hard. At the same time, use the energy, especially of the first 2 weeks of March, to make a lot of effort to do things, because Mars is so powerful and you cannot sit on that energy. It's just wants expression. But by the end of March, as Mars moves into Aries, or Mars moves into Aquarius, then sort of try and start to let go a little bit more, and let go into the eclipse season, and allow things to pan out as they will, and learn to go with the flow a bit more, and that will actually help you get more done. essentially. So Aries, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Taurus rising and or moon sign for March 2024, Taurus, your ruler Venus is moving through Capricorn, conjoined Mars, and previously conjoined Pluto in February. All of these coming together in your ninth house sign of travel, of study, of higher minded things, of more philosophical considerations, principles, truth. Obviously, this created and continues to create a somewhat of a power struggle, I imagine, going on here. It could be that you're dealing with some issue here with somebody, because of course Mars represents the partners and the hidden aspects, the 12th house ruler as well as the 7th house ruler. So you might be having to deal with some issues while traveling as well. You might have had to deal with some, power struggle in that case. The fact is, well, that the sun moving through your 10th house sign and the sun ruling your fourth sign, which is very much about building a nice home and being very stable in your home. And that's something, Taurus, that you're always very proud of. Anyone who has the sun ruling the fourth house shows that kind of Leo pride in their home. But of course, the sun is now opposite with Saturn and hemmed in with Mars on the one side and Pluto, and then Rahu on the other, the North Node in Pisces. So you can sort of see a sort of maybe tense situation developed here from the end of February into the beginning of March. That continues with Saturn, the Sun together, and Mercury all there together, which Mercury is about family and children and things like that. So there's a lot of kind of a squeeze going on, in other words, Taurus, into the beginning of March. And you might feel this in your home environment. You might feel this when traveling, at work. All of these things are impacted with friends, all of these things because of the 11th house, all of that. And leading in a way to all of these kind of things, um, culminating in a sense with this eclipse that's coming up in April. And that occurs in your 11th sign. And it's about friends, yes, but it's also about your ambitions. It's about, what you wish to gain from anything you do. So whatever it is that guides you initially, that's ninth house, and then that guides your actions, that's 10th house, and the need for something out of that. You want to get something out of what you're doing. So there could be some issue here and changes in terms of gains, monetary gains, as well as all other kinds of gains. And issues don't mean that's a bad thing. It just means that there could be some changes, some things that are revealed that you weren't aware of before. And that's absolutely a good thing, to be more aware. To be aware of like friends dynamics, especially that, probably have been a bit sort of not so clear recently because of Jupiter's transit through your 12th house. That's coming to an end in May now, so not much further. But certainly there could be some things that you've had to let go of as well. And maybe that's friendships as well, but also, like I said, gains of any kinds. And that could literally be monetary gains. So as Rahu continues through your 11th sign of gains, though, which is very well placed in a sense, and the eclipse is upcoming, there might be some opportunity now for you to gain something out of this whole situation. And as squeezed and as tense as this might be in the beginning of March, more especially, there's something about to give. And, I think with eclipses in general anyway, because they feel more tense in a way, because they feel more urgent, where it seems like time gets warped in our minds and we feel the urgency to do something, whether in fact we should do it or not. I think this is going to lead to some changes. Of course, it will lead to some changes. That's what eclipses are. But again, it's in respect to some sort of gains or friend groups or networks or associations that you have, or again, tracing it back to whatever it is that you're doing in work and travel and all of these matters. Home life as well, because of the sun, of course, that's what's being eclipsed. So I'd say there's some issue going on here in any of those spheres, but again, more especially in terms of home, travel, work, gains, money, all of these things, friendships. So let me show you first of all the new moon that occurs on the 10th of March, and then we'll take it from there. So the new moon here is with Saturn, and you can see here as well, Venus, your ruler, has joined the new moon in your 10th house sign. Venus in your 10th sign obviously shows a focus on work, but again, because the sun is the fourth lord, it's home as well. So work-life balance, of course, will be a key thing here. Now, again, the issue here is the Mars and Pluto on one side and Rahu on the other. This could create some sort of other tension, kind of like being squeezed. And again, like I said, because it's leading to this eclipse in your 11th sign by the beginning of April, it could feel like things are being squeezed, and that leads to changes that have to happen. So I would allow this to happen at this point if you feel like any kind of squeeze going on. And so the squeeze again between the ninth and 11th house could be travels and all of that, and friends and traveling with friends maybe, or something, or studies, or any kind of activity that gives you a broader scope. But your work life and home life is being impacted by this. That's the key thing to say here, because the sun is conjoined, the moon for the new moon, obviously, but Saturn is here as well as your ruler Venus, all hemmed in between Mars and Rahu. So the other thing to say about all of that, of course, is that Jupiter, which rules your 11th sign where the eclipse occurs, is in your 12th sign of letting go and surrendering all of this, surrendering some ambition perhaps you've had, or like letting go of a friendship, maybe even something that you've had on the cards for a while, but you maybe need to let go of now. It's been aspected by all of these planets, Mars, Saturn, and Rahu. So Mars, Saturn, Rahu, all aspecting Jupiter in your 12th sign. As Jupiter is finishing up now in March and April in your 12th sign and conjoins Uranus there could be some, especially with Mars's aspect, into the beginning of March, there could be something revealed. There could be something, deeper within yourself that's revealed, a very private insight, but it also could be something very obviously revealed to you by a friend or a group or association that you have of some kind. There could be some monetary issue going on here because Jupiter rules the 8th and 11th house. In your 12th house, there could be something revealed around money. And all of this, again, it feels a bit sort of like, yeah, things are being revealed and all of that, but it feels like it's squeezed. So it's almost like when it has to reach a sort of critical point before it gets revealed. And so maybe that's the thing to think about into March, April, Taurus. So that's the new moon. It begins the month on the 10th of March, with some tension, again, like I said, because of the hemming in effect of Mars and Rahu, and then its conjunction with Saturn. Then a couple of weeks later, we have that full moon and an eclipse. And so this eclipse, of course, is important. I mean, any eclipse is important, but this eclipse is important in terms of, getting the details right. And because it's your 5th sign, it's very much about around children, but it's also about any kind of creative self-expression or planning for your future. And, getting the details right is one thing, but also letting go of something is another thing, because it's a South Node eclipse. Ketu is here. So you might have to let go of some of the, finer print and think about more so the upcoming solar eclipse on April 8th in your 11th sign in Pisces, where everything is gathering. Everything is sort of like bottlenecked into this 11th sign with now Mars and Saturn on one side and Jupiter, Uranus on the other coming together. And that eclipse in April, though I'm talking about the following month, April, it's really starting in March on the 25th on this full moon and partial lunar eclipse. And you might feel the intensity build into this full moon and eclipse and changes that are happening, and then will subsequently happen into that biggest reset, really, of April 8th and that solar eclipse in your 11th sign. So, again, 5th sign is about what you would love to do, and it's the people that you love also. So, it's children, lover, relationships. It's about planning your future and something that you would love dearly. But the 11th sign is about a bigger picture thing where it's like, okay, this is what I would love to do, but this is the bigger picture here. This is my highest ambition. This is what I want to give back, in a sense. And because Jupiter, which rules this 11th sign, is in your 12th sign, it's very much a time of giving things up also maybe. But apart from that, it's a time for allowing things. So allowing and surrendering. Surrendering doesn't mean giving up always. Sometimes surrendering allows the thing to be more so. And so that's something to think about more into the end of April or into the end of March and beginning of April, as you allow and surrender and allow things to be more. And when you allow things to be, they can actually be more than they would have been otherwise. Because if you're trying to like make things happen in such a very detailed fashion, which is not really going to be easy at this time. And it's essentially because of the eclipses and all of that, but it's also because of Mercury in Pisces, ruling the 5th sign and 2nd sign in the 11th sign, Pisces. Mercury is not really comfortable in Pisces. The mind gets overwhelmed with all of the details and it cannot cope with them anyway. So again, allowing these things to happen and surrendering all of this would be more important. The day after the eclipse, Mercury moves into Aries, your 12th sign. So it's again that surrendering, and letting it go. And again, not giving up, but allowing things to be more. And once you can do that, I think that this period will be a lot easier on you, even though it creates a lot of complexity, these eclipses and the upcoming Mercury retrograde also in April, and all of these planets having gathered now in just 3 signs in your 10th, 11th, and 12th. Again, it's about what are you doing? What do you want to gain from that? And how can you let go more to gain more, actually? Letting go, gaining more, thinking about that. So, Taurus, I hope that's been of help. I, as always, wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Gemini rising and or moon sign for March 2024, Gemini, your ruler Mercury is in Aquarius for the beginning of the month. And just as from the end of February, its conjunction with Saturn and the Sun, obviously, therefore, its combustion, it's probably not been the easiest transit for you, and it's leading to a sort of burnout in many ways, I would imagine, because it then goes into Pisces, its debilitation sign. Now, isn't all bad. It's not all bad for any planet to be in debilitation. Everything is good for something. But Mercury and the mind and logical planning ahead and doing something here is likely to be met with a lot of confusion and overwhelmment. So Mercury in Pisces eventually leads to this kind of sense of like frazzled mind, not being able to deal with all of the many things that have to be dealt with. And so I think Gemini, probably this period into March and into April for the eclipse, and then Mercury's retrograde in April back into Pisces. So it's actually going to stay for a long time in Pisces. I think this time for you is a time for really letting go a little bit more of the details. Now, Mercury goes into Pisces on March 7th, but it will peak out into Aries from March 25th until April 9th briefly, but it'll go back into Pisces and then it will stay until May 10th. So really from March, April into the middle of May, we've got Mercury, a ruler in Pisces, where it doesn't really like to be. So if I show you that here by the 7th, it's just moved in and then conjoins Neptune, and then it's going to conjoin Rahu it's going to go back and over Rahu a couple of times as well because of its retrograde, and will actually station on Rahu by the time it stations direct by the end of April. So there's a lot of confusion going on here in the next few weeks, Gemini. A lot of confusion, too much information, too much overwhelmment for the mind to cope with. Now, for you, Gemini, you're going to feel this depending on whether this is your rising sign or moon sign or whatever it might be. This is a very personal experience, but it's a personal experience that is felt in the world, in your work life, especially because it's in your 10th whole sign. Mercury is a very private thing for you in many ways because it rules your 4th sign, which is the home and happiness and, your direction in life and your clarity about where you're going. But because of its transit through your 10th house, and again, it's retrograde. This is something you're always doing anyway, Gemini. You're always like thinking about where you're going in life and what you're doing and your direction in terms of what makes you happy. But this is very much about the things that you do that make you happy, the work that you do, your vocation, your career, 10th house. And because it's going to slip out of the 10th house into the 11th house by the 25th of March, and then go retrograde into April and then go back into the 10th house, this back and forth between the 10th and 11th house is going to be obviously a lot of questioning about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what are you getting out of it. So Gemini, you might be thinking a lot about what you're doing and if it's worth it and what are you getting out of it and who are you doing it with as well. The 11th house into April and the retrograde is about really looking at the people you're involved with, your groups, like your associations, your networks, your friends, even like thinking about the friend circles that you have. Lots to question here, I would say, in March and April, Gemini. Now, again, Gemini, Mercury goes retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks or so at a time. So it's always going in and out of this process. You're always doing this. This is part and parcel of what it means to be a Gemini. But because it's doing it this year in this conjunction with Rahu, and therefore the eclipse is involved here, and it's moving in and out of Pisces and staying in Pisces for so long, it's a bit of a mixed bag, really. I mean, it is complicated for sure. And there's this, like I said, an overwhelmment that could be experienced. But when it does go retrograde and go back into Pisces, Venus will be there at the time as well. That maybe is a sort of like double negative where it kind of creates a positive situation where it's like a planet in debilitation, but though retrograde is almost behaving as if it's exalted. So there's definitely some strengths to achieve in this as well. And I think if you can keep an open mind, in other words, Gemini, about what you're doing and in terms of your career prospects and why you're doing anything you're doing, not just career, just any action you're taking now, just be really open-minded about it. I think you're going to achieve a great deal of insight into new ways of doing things. And that will give you a better way of doing things. And then by improving the way you're doing things, you're going to like save a lot of energy. But again, just be mindful of the sort of everyday stuff that can go awry. Mercury's retrogrades, especially, and this is in April more so, but it's leading up to this in March. They're just generally more annoying than anything else, where it's like things don't work out as you hoped, or there's just like lack of communication or miscommunication or a miss, whatever call, or that email didn't get sent, you thought got sent. It's all these kind of like typical everyday stuff. But when you add those onto more complex changes that are happening because of the eclipse here, and the eclipses start by the end of March in your fourth sign and then lead to that eclipse in your 10th sign. So home and work, there's a lot of change going on anyway. And when you add these kind of like petty annoyances into the mix, it's likely that you're going to be, overwhelmed by all of it. So again, as long as you keep an open mind, these changes will happen anyway. And so allow them to happen, surrender into it. Like this sign Pisces is more about surrendering all of this anyway. And as detail oriented as you might be, and as mercurial as you might be, and want to be very practical and down to earth about things, this is the reason why Mercury in Pisces is a challenge most often, because it's like we're asked to let go of all of those details and not be so practical about it, not be so detail oriented. Think about the bigger picture here and surrender all of that, because by surrendering, you're going to allow things to be more easily. And actually, you're going to allow things to be more than they would have been otherwise if you try and just keep things, you know, buttoned down, right? So there's a less of a sense of things being pinned down at this point and more of a sense of flow and freedom that can create all kinds of wonderful things in your life if you allow it. And this is also because of Mercury's conjunction with Neptune. The exact conjunction occurs as soon as it moves in by this 8th of March. Something to be really open-minded about again. And then later on, its conjunction with Rahu. And its conjunction with Rahu is, again, a long one because it's going to come back and conjoin with Rahu again. But the first conjunction is 17th, 18th of March. It's going to come back, and by the end of April, conjoin Rahu again by the 25th of April. So just again, an open mind about all of the things that are presented. It could be some work situation, like I said, practically. It could be like situation with your superiors, any superior in any way, whether work or not. And that's something to be mindful of. Then let me show you, first of all, actually, let me go back and show you that the new moon is on the 10th and the new moon is in your ninth sign. And the ninth sign is very much about what guides you in the first place. Why do you do anything you do? If you don't know why you do what you do, then you're not going to do it and you're not going to continue doing it. So Saturn's transit, long transit here for all of this year, all of last year and this year into the beginning of next year. And this new moon at this point in March is obviously asking you to look at the bigger picture here. And again, why are you doing what you're doing? And to drop anything that is not right for you and is not your truth, as it were. Saturn in the ninth house is very much about, questioning what is true, actually. Venus conjoined it as well for the new moon. And you can see here Mars on one side, as well as Pluto and Rahu on the other. This new moon is a bit tense for sure. And it might, again, create a situation or a thought or some sense of something not being quite right, or being forced to see if something is right, if it's true. And again, that is going to have a knock-on effect on anything that you do in the future. And yeah, so thinking about that overall, the other thing to say about Jupiter, which is the ruler of the 10th sign where this eclipse occurs in April, is in your 11th sign and is conjoining Uranus in the coming weeks by April 20th. It is itself being aspected by Mars, Saturn, and Rahu all at the same time right now in March. And as strong as Mars is, it's in the 8th sign and it's creating some unforeseen circumstances for you, I would say. And then Saturn again, questioning of what you believe to be true when these things change. And then Rahu, this kind of undercurrent of, it's ambitious for sure, but it's not quite clear of itself. It doesn't really know what it wants. It just knows it wants, and it's not always not clear about what it wants. And so when you add all of these into the mix and their aspects onto Jupiter, your 10th lord, it's not just work, by the way, it's also relationships that are going to be impacted here because of Jupiter's rulership. And so it's, again, worth keeping an open mind about anything that you're doing with whoever you're doing it with at this time. So then the couple of weeks later, when we have that full moon in Virgo in your fourth sign, this is an eclipse. So we're now starting into eclipse, and this is going to start to really change things fundamentally. Fourth house and 10th house eclipse is very much about getting a work-life balance. And sometimes the balance needs to be lost to achieve it again. And eclipses tends to kind of shake things up for a while. So it might feel more urgent from the end of March. Things might feel more, intense. It could be intensely good as well, could be enjoyable. But there's something to be mindful of here, of letting go of as well, because even though it's a full moon, you might think of full moons being sort of more kind of grasping something and wanting something, and all of that is true, but it's also a culmination point, and then afterwards this is sort of letting go stream. But the fact that it's with Ketu, the south node of the moon, this eclipse, a partial lunar eclipse on March 25th, as Mercury, its ruler and your ruler, is about to leave Pisces and step into Aries, there's definitely some endings here and some new beginnings, some possibilities that you really need to keep an open mind about, I would say. So that's the full moon. And again, it's an important full moon because it's opening up this 2-week window of the eclipses. And this eclipse coming up in April, on April 8th, which I'll talk about next month, is a really important one. It's so important because of all of the planets are gathering around it and in Pisces, with Mars now having moved into Aquarius, conjoining Saturn and Venus here also. Venus will conjoin the eclipse itself in Pisces. Mercury is about to step out, but it'll go back in the day after the eclipse on April 9th. So during the eclipse itself, though, it's in Aries on the other side with Jupiter and Uranus coming together by exact degrees. So there's a whole sort of hemming in situation going on, a squeeze going on around your 10th house objectives, around career, around your direction in life. That's going to impact you in a big way, I imagine, in terms of what you're doing. It's really going to send you off on a different path, I imagine. And whether or not you change anything fundamental on paper, in that sense, I think you're going to change your relationship to what you're doing in every sense. So an important time, Gemini, it's a really important time to think about, being more open-minded about what you're doing and not to try and force things too quickly here, because things are already going to feel urgent. And, just to question whether or not you need to do that thing at all until these eclipses pass by April, mid-April especially. It's going to shake things up in a big way. And then Mercury's retrograde until the end of April is going to then create this big review process that you're going to go through throughout the whole of April as well. So for now, I hope that's been of help. I'll talk more about, of course, Mercury's retrograde in April and that really important eclipse on April 8th in the next report. And I wish you all the best for the coming month. And until next time. For Cancer rising and or moon sign for March 2024, Cancer, we're heading into eclipse season, and the moon, therefore, obviously lining up with the sun and the earth and the nodes, creates the eclipses and creates the changes, the insights into the changes that are to happen. Initially, internally, I think we always have to think about eclipses as first psychological and then more material. They are not planets after all, the nodes. They create these shifts in our awareness, and it's those shifts in our awareness that creates changes in our life, and we then make changes. So if you can get on board, first of all, with the actual changes that are likely to happen subsequently, you're just more able to flow with the changes, and there's a lot of changes coming up. So the month starts out with the sun in your eighth sign conjoined Saturn, your seventh lord, and the eighth lord in your eighth sign. Mercury's there also. So there's a lot of focus on eighth sign. And also because these planets are hemmed in between Mars on the one side and Rahu on the other, with Mars very powerful, exalted in your seventh sign. There's a bit of tension happening here around relationships, I would imagine, Cancer. So this is something to be really mindful of in terms of your partner, your relationships in general, whether they be romantic or business. I would say that there's something to work out here. Mars in the seventh, it is very powerful, exalted, and dignified, of course, but it's in the seventh, and it's an area of the chart that Mars doesn't do so well in, because Mars is about, you know, selfish desires and needs and willpower and force. And seventh house is about the ability to compromise and to negotiate. And so they don't really mix at all. And yes, the fact that Venus is here might smooth it out somewhat, but Venus itself is just kind of under the thumb of Mars. And all of these planets, including Pluto, showing those more hidden dynamics in relationships, are all under the thumb of Saturn, which is itself conjoined the Sun, your second lord, in the eighth house. So there's a lot of complex dynamics to deal with here in relationships, again, be they romantic or business. So to keep an open mind about what's going on now, and if there's a squeeze that you're feeling on in, financial squeeze, perhaps as well, the Sun, the second lord, hemmed in between these planets conjoined Saturn. If it's a sibling relationship as well, Mercury is involved. If it's friends, Venus is involved. All of these relationships, in fact, all the significant relationships you could think about, like the relationships with your partners, with friends, with family, with siblings, all of these relationships are being impacted here with this, again, squeeze. So, and also the eighth house isn't just feeling the squeeze, it's also the uncertainty of change that is unexpected, that you haven't planned for. Eighth house is that unexpected change. So to be really open-minded about what's happening, I would say here at this point, and to use the strength of Mars, the willpower to do something here at this point, and to be more proactive in a more positive way. Mars is aspecting Jupiter, and Jupiter is in your 10th sign. So taking action that is more fortunate for all concerned is also likely. Hopefully, you will take that right action, and then the right action will lead to more positive outcomes. That leads to more positive action. This kind of snowball effect that Mars can have on Jupiter is certainly there. But as with Mars and Jupiter and Uranus, by the way, in the mix, that can also show on the other side a more erratic decisions and actions that are taken here at this point, because of not being very clear about things. Because the thing about Jupiter is that it's been aspected by Mars, by Saturn, and by Rahu, which Rahu is in its sign Pisces. So there's this kind of like cloud maybe, or shadow, and especially with the upcoming eclipse I'll talk about now, there's this shadow over events. There's this shadow over what you're doing, and it might just manifest as just not being very clear about something and just doing something sort of without all of the information or without all of the knowledge that you require to do it very clearly. So Jupiter can be a bit sort of, and especially with its conjunction with Uranus, and again, aspected by Mars, Saturn, and Rahu, all of them could show this kind of action that is not thought through, is another big thing that this could express itself as. So let me show you, first of all, the lunations, and we'll look at, first of all, the new moon on the 10th. And this is happening in your eighth house sign. And again, this is squeezed between Mars and Rahu. And a very powerful Mars at this point, remember, coming to exaltation in Capricorn in your seventh sign, and then Rahu in your ninth sign, questioning things. And, there could be some relationship issues going on here, again, whether it's business or romantic, personal, or any kind of relationship at all. And this new moon is a reset point, but it's a reset point in terms of a maybe tense situation, a reset point where there's kind of like this feel of, being forced into something even, so thinking about that in terms of being forced into something, or changes that are being forced through at this time that are sort of outside of your control in many ways. The eighth house, of course, nothing is completely outside of your control in another cosmic sense or a more spiritual sense, but eighth house in a practical sense shows things that you are not maybe fully aware of. It's a hidden house. So this new moon in your eighth house could show a need to kind of tap into that, the hidden dimensions, your subconscious, to recognize that actually you're, writing the script on some level, in some way. And this new script, of course, is full of change. It's like things in a script that have just like been added last minute, that you feel is not going with the script, that gets a lot of ad lib here. And that's a lot to do with the eclipses, as I'll show you now, and also Mercury's upcoming retrograde. Mercury's now slipped into Pisces. It's going to back up into Pisces in April, because it's going to go retrograde from the 1st of April. So even though it makes it out of Pisces into Aries briefly by the 25th of March, it's going to go back in the day after the solar eclipse on the 8th of April. So Mercury in Pisces is a whole other sort of like mind bewildering, sort of mind boggling overwhelming that can be experienced, because Mercury in Pisces is just, there's too much to take on, there's too much change happening, there's too much to think about, and a lot of things that you maybe cannot figure out. And now, especially more so with Mercury conjoined Neptune and Rahu, and it will conjoin Rahu a couple of times because of its retrograde in your ninth sign, it'd be very hard to be very clear about what is true at this point, I imagine, Cancer. So to be really open-minded about what that is, and not to try and pin it down at this point, because it's just not going to be clear. So this is the full moon on the 25th. The moon, your ruler, eclipsed by Ketu, the south node in your third house. There's some need to let go of something here, some wish, some desire, some effort. Like letting go of effort is a big theme of March and April anyway, because of the eclipses happening in Virgo and Pisces. But certainly for you, Cancer, I think it's even more apt. So letting go of your effort here and, surrendering into what is happening, and surrender your whole even view of things, because Moon conjoined Ketu in Virgo, leading to that eclipse in Pisces a couple of weeks later, is just that. Even though Ketu in Virgo is asking you to be very detail oriented in a way, and to be very clear about things, and be very clear in your communications and how you're thinking about things, and really think it through. Oftentimes an eclipse can bring up this sort of more impulsive nature of Ketu, and the moon here in Virgo, it's just maybe just not having thought through all the details, and kind of being very impulsively taking something on or initiating something that you might later regret. This is something to be mindful of. Or simply saying something that you later regret, or sending off that curt email very, obviously in a heated moment. Just thinking about these kinds of situations and possibilities at this time, especially around the full moon on the 25th. And the other reason of that is that because the ruler of this, Mercury, is at the very last degree of Pisces, having been completely lost really in this whole kind of dynamic at this time, but then stepping into Aries the day after. But that stepping into Aries itself is a bit sort of like awash with sort of confusion, so there won't be a lot of clarity forthcoming by the end of April, or by the end of March into the beginning of April. 2 weeks later, then we have that solar eclipse. So this is the solar eclipse. I'll show you it now, even though we're getting into April. It's on the 8th of April. All of the planets are gathered in just 3 signs. It's an eclipse in your 9th house, with planets either side on the 8th and 10th house axis, squeezing essentially this 9th house. And again, 9th house, what is it? It's about truth. It's about your guiding principles. If you're traveling at this time, to be really open-minded. You got Mercury retrograding back into the 9th house with an eclipse here. Venus is smoothing things out somewhat, but I would say, if you've got travel plans for April, to be really open-minded about that. If you've got, anything that you're doing, any action that you're taking, any work-related anything, or anything at all, be really open-minded about the changes that are happening now, because it's not very clear at this time. And it won't really get clear until Mercury has finished its retrograde by the 25th of April. It begins on the 1st of April and continues to the 25th, where it will conjoin Rahu once again. So there's there's a squeeze on, Cancer, as you can see. There's changes afoot. There's a lot to work out, and yet a lot to let go of, and to surrender at this point, and to surrender your effort into allowing things to be, and to allow a different opinion or a different perspective on how things are, to allow things to be more than they actually are right now, because it might feel like they're not being as much as they could be. But if you, again, allow things to be more, then there could be so much more. If you can think about it that way, you probably got a better handle of the transits in March and April. So Cancer, wish you all the best for the month ahead. Hope that's been of help. And until next time. For Leo rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Leo, your ruler, the sun, is in your opposite sign, Aquarius, in conjoined Saturn into the beginning of March. So you've been feeling this throughout February, leading to the end of February and into the beginning of March. This sort of hemming in situation is happening. Now, there could be this squeeze on that you're feeling in your relationship. It could be some work-related relationship also, because Saturn rules both your sixth and your seventh, conjoined the sun, your ruler, and conjoined Mercury also. So it's maybe some family issues as well, financial issue, second and 11th Lord Mercury in your seventh, conjoined Saturn and the sun. So this could be a squeeze where you have Saturn, Sun, Mercury all in this one sign, and then Mars and Rahu either side. So just to be mindful of this, Leo, I would say that there could be some issue to deal with here, and that maybe you feel like forced into it as well. You might feel like there's something been, you're pressurized to do something as well. To take a step back, I would say at this time is important, and to consider Saturn and the long-term plan, bigger picture here. Sometimes the Saturn sun can just literally make you feel a bit under par, like your energy isn't fully there. Maybe. I mean, the fact that Saturn is powerful is one thing, but Saturn is also combust. So there's a kind of like give and take here, you know. And I think anytime your ruler comes together with your seventh house ruler, there's always this relationship give and take here. And it might conflict with certain things in your life. You might feel conflicted in a general sense, but I do think that there's a potential here for using this energy to get more focused and to push something through. And again, to think of the long term and the long-term implications, more especially when we consider Saturn and the sign Aquarius. This is where the new moon will occur on March 10th. So I can show you that here. So this new moon on March 10th in your seventh sign is obviously a reset in your relationship. I mean, every year that you have a new moon in your seventh sign, that's the case. So the 10th of March is an important time to, you know, reset some boundary potentially. That could be one thing, like reset some boundary relationship issue, because Saturn's here, especially. It's not just a new moon in your seventh house, it's a new moon conjoined Saturn, the ruler. Venus has also conjoined the new moon in Aquarius. Mars will in a couple of days, but still Mars and Rahu are either side. Again, this hemming in, kind of this squeeze that's been put on the new moon. So again, this new moon and new lunar month, therefore, could feel like there's a squeeze on. And again, there's some pressure on from somebody else. And again, just to be thinking about setting healthy boundaries, I would say, what's a healthy boundary look like? Um, Venus in the seventh house tends to smooth over all of these kinds of rough edges, I would say. And even though there are some rough edges here, I think this could be potentially more beneficial. The fact that Mars also is exalted in your sixth sign shows that there's an ability here to overcome the challenges. And maybe the only thing about that is that you're going to feel so powerful that you overdo it and that you make more problems than is necessary, that you make more enemies than you need to. Um, so that's what I would say about the Mars. And the other side, we have Rahu, Neptune, and Mercury now. Mercury, you can see here, has moved into Pisces in your eighth sign. This can create a bit of confusion around the details. And as we'll see in the upcoming full moon and eclipse on the 25th of March in Mercury's sign, Virgo, there could be some confusion around the details about money-related issues here and family issues because it's the second and eighth sign activated here. So if I show you that here in with the eclipse on the 25th, it's a partial lunar eclipse in Virgo. Mercury's on the opposite side in Pisces, and it's going to finish up actually on this eclipse, move into Aries. So it's at the very last degree of Pisces. It's very weak. It's conjoined the sun now, which has moved into Pisces, getting ready for the eclipse coming up in April. Mercury, the North Node, and Neptune. This is all very confusing. Eighth house is already invisible. It's not a very conscious part of your being necessarily. It's unconscious or subconscious. And it's all the hidden dynamics anyway. Eighth house, like, you know, money issues are a big one here, but any kind of intimacy issues as well, any kind of hidden stuff. The second house is more visible, but it's still not that visible. I mean, we hide our wealth, you know, people don't talk about their bank balance to everybody. Second house, therefore, this full moon and partial lunar eclipse is likely to reveal something about your financial setup, whether it's to others or whether within the family dynamic or whatever it might be. But also it's revealing your true value, your own true value as in your own self-worth, but also what you value. So All of these things might be conversations that you're having as well at this time, but to be, again, open-minded about it because the details are a bit sketchy at least, because Mercury is in Pisces and it's about to step into Aries and then go retrograde into April, from April 1st, and then go back into Pisces as well in April. So this is not very clear. So especially from the 25th of March, where we have this full moon and eclipse, and then 2 weeks later we have that complete reset then in the eighth house with a new moon and total solar eclipse in Pisces. I'll just show you it for now, just so you can see it. But this is the eclipse, and here it is in your eighth house. So this is a whole reset for not just the month of April, but really for the year ahead. And it has to do a lot with again, hidden things, whether it's financial things or issues around intimacy in your relationship or relationships, and family dynamics and your family and in-laws, and all of these things are signified with the eighth house. It also obviously shows more spiritual pursuits and insights into those realms that with an eclipse, I think is absolutely primed for insight and deep insights into the nature of things and your nature and the ever-changing nature that is life and the unpredictability that obviously life can throw up all the time. There's a lot of unpredictability, and that's coming from an astrologer. A lot of unpredictability into April. That for you, Leo, is in a way more unpredictable. There's things that you cannot see, and there's like under the surface of things and coming up into your relationship dynamics and family dynamics, and you're going to have to be really open-minded and be very um open to these kinds of changes. So, Leo, that is the month of March 2024. I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best, and until next time. For Virgo rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Virgo, there is a lot of change happening in March and April because of the eclipses in your sign and opposite. So your first and seventh house, all about yourself and the other, whether it's any other or more significant other. It's very much about changes that are happening in your relationships and in your personal self. So this together with Mercury, which is about to move into your seventh sign and hang out there for a long time, really from April to May, because of its retrograde back into Pisces in April, and that eclipse in April, especially a total solar eclipse on April 8th. Really, March is starting this whole period of change. And the key thing to be mindful of here, of course, is that when there's a lot of change happening, as there is, and unexpected change, as there is, a lot of the times it's best just to try and keep life as sort of level-headed as possible and step back and take a look at the bigger picture here, because it might feel like overwhelming because of Mercury and Pisces together with the eclipses and the retrograde and the everything else that's going on, as I'll show you. It's just there's a lot going on and it's almost too much for the mind to deal with. And if you try to deal with it all, i.e., if you try to figure it all out, you might become easily overwhelmed. So obviously it's a better idea to take a step back to, maybe not try and work it all out right now because everything's up in the air, everything's in flux, everything's changing for you. And don't think of change as a bad thing. There can be some really positive changes. Ultimately, everything that changes is for our betterment, but it might not feel like that in the moment. It might feel like with all these changes, and especially if you add further list to your to-do list, it's like you just could easily overwhelm yourself and not feel like it's you're making the best decisions that you could make and all of this. That's Mercury, that's Mercury in Pisces especially. So that's something to be mindful of overall, I would say, in March and in April. And because we start the month out with Mercury in your sixth sign with conjoined Saturn and the Sun, so combust and with Saturn in your sixth, and these are hemmed in between Mars and exalted Mars on one side and Rahu, the North Node, on the other. There might be a situation into the beginning of March you've been feeling right really from the end of February where you feel a bit pressurized into making a change or making something happen or do something. And because of you might feel that way, it might not feel so great. Now, it still is the thing that you need to do, and you might have done it otherwise. But sometimes when we feel pressurized into doing something, we don't make the best decisions seemingly, or we don't, it's not perfect, right? We just kind of maybe feel pushed into something. But at the same time, the other side of this is that it could represent a really focused energy, you know, Mercury, Saturn, Sun in the sixth, and this hemming in of them. But these powerful planets, Mars exalted in your fifth, Saturn powerful in your sixth, though combust. There's a lot of things that you can tap into here, a lot of power and energy and focus and willpower that you can avail of here to make things happen. But again, like I said, because there's so much happening, if you overdo that impulse, this is where you could end up with a kind of frazzled mind. So here I'll show you with Mercury as it moves in. By the 6th of March, it moves in, and then we have the new moon on the 10th. So this is the new moon in Aquarius, your sixth sign, with Mercury, your ruler, having moved into Pisces. Now, a new lunar month with this kind of combination, new moon with Saturn, Venus has also joined it. And again, all hemmed in between Mars and Rahu, with Mercury now with Rahu and Neptune. Again, a confused situation perhaps, and a kind of like tense situation, and a kind of something is putting the squeeze on, or somebody or some situation is putting the squeeze on, or you feel like you're squeezed into something or pressurized into something. It's important to be considerate of that for yourself and other people. And also leading to the full moon in a couple of weeks after this, which is a full moon in your sign on the 25th of March and a partial lunar eclipse. That's the beginning of a whole period, therefore, into April, with the Mercury retrograde on top of that in April, that is leading to a lot of change that really gets instigated in a way by the 10th of March. In other words, the 10th of March new moon, it starts to move into that shift and that changes that are happening, those unexpected changes that are happening based on the things that you're doing now. So think about the things that you're doing now. Think about the things that you might feel pressurized into doing. Think about the bigger picture always and the consequences, the long-term consequences always about whatever it is you're doing, I would say, Virgo. And think about it as it is all happening perfectly. It is, even if it doesn't feel that way, and even if it feels like your mind is overwhelmed by all the things that are happening, all the changes, it is happening perfectly. So that's Mercury in Pisces. Conjunct Neptune and Rahu just creates even further confusion. And I think this is something to be mindful of if your moon is in Virgo. If your rising sign or ascendant is Virgo, then this is something to be mindful of your energy and energy expenditure and the relationship stuff kind of cropping up now where you're really having to negotiate a lot with other people and maybe another significant person in particular. And this will have to be gone back over again by April as it retrogrades back into Pisces. So there's a lot to work out here. And then when you think you have it all worked out, then you have to go back to the drawing board and work it out again. So think about that in March, that you keep an open mind about what it is you're starting. And even if you feel pressurized into starting something, then know that it might not work out from the get-go, or at least the details might not be very clear from the get-go. And then, but you can go back and redo them. It's no problem. Mercury retrograde is all about redoing things anyway, and that's the best way to use that energy in April. So that's what I'd say from the beginning of March, from the 10th of March. Then we have Mars move into Aquarius, and you can see here Mars and Venus together now in Aquarius with Saturn. The Sun has moved into Pisces by mid-month. It does that every month, and you can see here Mercury, your ruler, is joining Rahu by the 18th. This is again where confusion reigns. It's not very clear what's going on, and again, you could just be overwhelmed mentally around the things that are happening and the things that have to be done. You know, it could be a lot to do with work as well, because Rahu rules your sixth house. Saturn and Venus and Mars now are all in your sixth house where that new moon occurred on March 10th. It could be a lot to do with work, but it could also be a work relationship thing that's kind of having to be worked out as well. And because again, we're leading to eclipse here by the April period, and then Mercury retrograding back into this portion of the zodiac, it's all hinging on relationships and how you relate as well in general. And I think that, again, to be mindful of how you're relating to other people and be, you know, it's hard not to be impulsive and reactive and react to all of these things, of course. But, and maybe that's perfect as well. Maybe it's perfect that your reaction itself leads to the changes that were always meant to happen. You know, maybe that is the case. But again, just to be mindful of it, I would say, and to know when everything's in flux and to take a step back is probably a better piece of advice. So this is the full moon on the 25th. It's in your sign. It's conjunct the South Node Ketu. it shows this kind of hyper vigilant, maybe hyper focused, critical, hypercritical nature of Ketu in Virgo, and the full moon with Virgo is like, and an eclipse is probably more of that. And so the issue though is, yeah, you could be really hypercritical, self-critical even, or just really focused on the details, but then and you're honing in on all of the problems that need to be dealt with, but then you drop them and walk away. This is one of the downsides, the potentials of Ketu and Virgo. Obviously, the better expression of this would be to be really focused on the details and to do something about them to get rid of problems and not walk away from it. So that's the full moon on March 25th. It's in Hasta. The hand literally means hand. It's a lunar mansion in the middle of Virgo, and it makes Virgo really what we think of when we think of Virgo, someone who's very sort of dexterous and literally good with their hands and makes things and does things and is very good at managing things and micromanaging things also. Ketu here is even more so a micromanager, but again, it's almost like pointing out all the faults and it's like, oh, these are all the problems, and then getting sick of them and then wanting to walk away. So again, just be mindful of fault finding without doing anything about them, or just being overly critical about things for no reason at all, really. Because this is kind of dissatisfaction, perhaps. You might have this sense of self, like dissatisfaction. You might look at yourself in a very sort of, even physically, if this is your ascendant, for example, Ketu here can show changes that you want to make in your physical body. And you might be looking at your physical body in the mirror thinking, you know, I want to change this, I want to change that. But then if you do that too much, like I said, and you just look through your whole body scan and make all of these criticisms, then you're more likely going to walk away and say, oh God, forget about it, you know? But if you just kind of take a step back and not be so critical of yourself and say, oh, maybe I can make an improvement here or there or wherever, then you're more likely to do that. So anyway, that's the full moon in Hasta in Virgo on the 25th of March. We have this, I'll mention it now because even though we're not into April, I'm going to mention the eclipse in April because they come in pairs, of course. So this eclipse on the 25th of March opens up this 2-week window where everything kind of changes. And the sands are shifting beneath your feet now, and especially in yourself and your relationship. You might be going through some personal changes now and changes literally physically, like I said, if it's your rising sign that impacts your relationship or how you relate and how you relate to your partner more especially, of course. So this then, if I just show you the 2 weeks later, this is the eclipse on the 8th of April. You can see here that Saturn and Mars are coming together by exact degree. Jupiter and Uranus by exact degree. Mercury is retrograde throughout April from 1st to the 25th of April and will step back into where the eclipse occurs on the 8th of April, the day after, on the 9th of April. So everything is culminating in these three signs, pivoting on your relationships. So, sorry, let me bring it back to your sign here. So Virgo is the rising, and then seventh sign is where everything is pivoting. So obviously this is going to feel the squeeze as well. Now, at the same time, even though there's a lot of tension here with Mars and Saturn in your sixth house, these are well placed in your sixth house to actually make improvements in your life. So that's positive. It's kind of like a double negative in a way. These do well in this house. And then on the other side, Jupiter, Uranus is like, yeah, in the eighth house and of change and unexpected change, but this is more positive, unexpected change. So actually for you, Virgo, ultimately, even though it might be overwhelming, there's a lot of positive change coming out of here and sort of like challenges that come through into a better situation. You come out on top when you make the effort, right? Or you get an unexpected piece of news and it's like positive. But still, like I said, again, be mindful of yourself and your mind being overworked, being overwhelmed with the details here because there's just too much to work out. I'll talk more about this eclipse in April, of course, but I wanted to just flag it now because it's such an important time, not just in the month of April, but in the whole year ahead from this April 24 until April 2025. So it's going to have a big impact on the year to come. And of course, it means that there's big changes afoot in your relationship and in your personal self. Of course, as I said, tracing it back to that full moon and eclipse on the 25th of March. So Virgo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and I'll speak to you in April. For Libra rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Libra, your ruler Venus is conjoined Mars and Pluto in sidereal Capricorn in your fourth house sign in the home environment and related to the mother. and anything about care and self-care and home. This is where your ruler is moving through for the first few days of March until it moves into Aquarius, where it gathers then with planets in Aquarius and the new moon, which occurs in Aquarius on the 10th of March. So we'll get to that in a minute. But I just want to highlight this kind of configuration that's built up throughout the end of February, really into the beginning of March, where Venus and Mars together in your fourth house, with Mars so powerful and aspecting your seventh house, where Jupiter and Uranus are conjoined. This could obviously show some impact on, your home life and your relationships. And, sometimes Mars, kind of literally can destroy peace. And even though Venus is very well placed in the fourth house to bring peace at home and all of that, Mars is like a bull in a china shop. And that could create this kind of disturbance in the peace. And again, its aspect to your seventh house more especially can create problems in your relationship when someone says something or something is done where there's just like, there's a rocking of the boat here for sure in some way. And, Libras don't like to rock the boat generally unless it's absolutely necessary. And maybe though it is absolutely necessary now. This is the thing to think about, Libra. Maybe you do have to rock the boat to gain some equilibrium because maybe things are imbalanced at this time. And things are in a way in balance because there's so many conjunctions going on and a clustering of planets that are leading into the end of March and beginning of April. And with everything that's going on at that time as well, with eclipses and Mercury retrogrades and a comet thrown in for good measure, there's a lot going on in March, April. Lots of change, and it might feel a bit sort of like squeezed and clustered together means sort of like things are forced together or forced to work together and they maybe don't work well together. And, this is not very balanced. And Libras, of course, are all about keeping the balance. And to think about that is to think about, again, maybe sometimes things have to be shook for a while for them to come back into balance. That's what I would say, Libra. So I'll show you here the first lunation, the new moon on the 10th. So here's the new moon. It'll be on the 10th. And it'll be in your fifth sign. And we have an interesting dynamic here. We've got Mercury having stepped into Pisces by the 6th or so. That is obviously itself a bit of a challenge for the mind to be able to grasp all of these things that are happening, the changes that are afoot. And with its conjunction with Neptune and the North Node Rahu and the upcoming eclipse, and its then subsequent retrograde back and over this eclipse point, there's a lot of unforeseeable things going on. And this is your sixth house where the eclipse happens in April, the major eclipse, the total solar eclipse on April 8th. So Libra, obviously there's some changes to your daily routine, sixth house. There's some changes to work. There's some changes to health regimes. You might have to change it up. You might just be changing it up. Something might happen where you just have to shake it up. Again, think about shaking it up as a necessary counterbalance and rebalancing act here. At the moment, though, with this new moon on the 10th of March, before we get to any of that, and I'll talk about the full moon before we get to the solar eclipse in April, there's a full moon by the end of March. We have this new moon that starts off this month on the 10th of March in your fifth sign with the sun, moon, of course, together, but then also conjunct Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, and Venus, your ruler, has joined them in the fifth house. And they're all hemmed in between Mars and Rahu. So again, there's a sense of a squeeze on here, a kind of intensity here, and it could be intensely good as well. You could be squeezed into a situation that feels good, but it could also feel just that squeezed, and you feel pressured maybe into something. Fifth house is very much about dealing with children, dealing with plans for the future, creating something, doing something that you want dearly, like you love, not just want, you love. And as much as you love it, though, it could be, again, it might feel like there's no choice but to do this, or I have to do this now. And when you add in the eclipses by the end of March, that even feels even more urgent, like changes have to happen. And we get kind of into that mode of thinking. So that's something to be mindful of, that, to question whether or not it's actually advisable to do too much at this time, because there's already so much changing, even if it's subtly changing around you, that the subtler something is, actually, the more powerful it is, really. It's not really the bigger changes that you're actually experiencing more obviously that actually are impacting necessarily at this time. It's actually more the subtler changes that are happening that is best probably just not to add more changes to, so that you can manage these subtler changes that will eventually make bigger changes in your life. The eclipses are not obvious in the beginning. They're kind of like psychological changes that are happening, and then that they subsequently make changes in your life. So this beginning of this whole period, though, is the 10th of March. And to think about that in terms of what's been pressured or what feels like a time, expiry has a, a time expiry. This is Saturn. It kind of feels more like progressive, but also like expiry dates are due. It's like, okay, I need to get this done, or whatever it is. That's Saturn, the Lord of Time. And again, think about that in terms of relationships, I would say in general as well, fifth house, but also relationships with your children or their own lives, or again, any kind of output that you're having, any plans that you have. And any plans that you do have, obviously, you have to really think twice about them because the details are not very clear. Mercury is in Pisces now. It will in April station retrograde by the 1st of April and until the 25th, but it will actually in that time go back into Pisces. And so that's Mercury retrograde in Pisces by April, together with the eclipse. And again, and a comet at this time that's due to become visible around April with an eclipse. This is showing a lot of change going on in your day-to-day life. I mean, I don't know if you can see it as any other way. So it's obviously advisable not to add more and more onto that, because then what happens is Mercury in Pisces can show the mind overwhelmed with everything that has to happen. I have to do so much, and like all of this is happening, and it's just it could easily overwhelm your mind. So think about that and think about how much do you really need to do at this time versus how much you need to respond to what is happening. Do what you need to do, of course, but I would just maybe advise not to do too much else. Don't add in so much more unless it, of course, feels very urgent to do so and it has to be done. Maybe that's part of what actually has to happen. But it's all change in March and April. So let me show you the full moon, though, because that's a full moon in your 12th sign in Virgo, and that's the eclipse. So this is the first of two eclipses. And you can see here that actually on this full moon, Mercury is actually hovering at the very edge of Pisces and Aries. So ruling this full moon, it means that the mind again is kind of not very clear about these details. And a full moon in your 12th house conjoined Ketu, the south node, can show this kind of lack of clarity as well around this. So again, getting the work-life balance right will be important here. Letting things go, surrendering whatever is happening at this full moon juncture on the 25th of March, without, considering Ketu in Virgo as more hypercritical in most instances. I think for you, Libra, there's a potential here of being less so and kind of letting that go. But then the downside of that I'm mentioning to other signs is Ketu and Virgo could be very critical and picking out all the problems. But then once you see all the problems and all of the many problems, you could easily want to just drop them and walk away. And this is the thing to be mindful of, I think, when you especially put this in your 12th house. So a full moon with Ketu in your 12th house might suggest you're just not dealing with something. At the same time, the emphasis obviously has shifted onto your 6th house, which is in a way about problems. And this is why Libra, you're kind of more the unusual sign in this sense, because how you deal with problems and everyday issues is that you have Pisces in your 6th house, which is actually more likened to the 12th house. And you have Virgo, which is like the 6th house, but it's in your 12th house. So you kind of have this kind of opposite kind of nature to what these things are about. And this is why, Libra, you probably get more done by allowing more and surrendering more, and then doing something, and then doing more, and then surrendering more, and then doing more and surrendering. It's kind of this balancing act, essentially, that these nodes and eclipses, especially from the end of March into April, are kind of maybe ramping it up. And it might feel like there has to be a lot to do and a lot of balance to get right. And you might be like feeling like you're on a kind of knife edge, right? And trying to balance all of these things, or like literally balancing on a pin. But again, let it all go. Just it's not that important in the grand scheme of things. If you can keep an eye on the bigger picture, the details will work themselves out in the end. The details are not important right now as much as the bigger picture. The details themselves are not clear because of Mercury as well, which rules this full moon, and it's about to go back into, or it's into Aries, but it will go back into Pisces. So it's going to retrograde. You can see here, it goes retrograde from the 1st of April. I won't go into the April period just yet, but just to say it's going to go retrograde from the 1st to the 25th of April, starting in your 7th house, going back into your 6th house. So there's some relationship dynamics that have to be worked out here with all the changes that are happening in your day-to-day life. And all the changes that have been happening in your personal life all this time, and with your children or home life or whatever it might be, or with a partner and your work life, all of these changes that are happening, that have to happen, lead to obviously changes in your relationship. So this is something to be mindful of throughout this whole period. I will show you the new moon on April 4th, even though we're into April now. I'll talk about it, of course, in the April forecast, but I just want to highlight it now because eclipses don't come on their own. They come in pairs. So again, it begins on the 25th of March, a 2-week period of the eclipse. It ends on the 8th of April. It culminates in a way, and a new moon total solar eclipse resets everything in your 6th house. Again, it's all about your day-to-day life, your work life. And with all the other planets hemmed in, it's like on one side you have Saturn and Mars conjoined, and then on the other hand, you have Jupiter and Uranus conjoined in Mars's sign. So this feels like a lot is hinging on your work and relationships here, and maybe it's working relationships as well, and relationships that don't work as well, and maybe they'll have to be like, adjusted, right? So there's definitely some things here, whether it's children as well into the mix, but all of these things are likely into the mix. Children and relationships, love and relationships, work, love and relationships, all of these things are going to have to be worked out in this current period in April. And because they're all culminating together around this 6th house, there's things that have to be worked out. And even if it doesn't feel good to do them, they have to be done. And that's something to think about, Libra, into April also. And this all gets instigated in March. You can see here that the Mercury retrograde is going to back up, and the day after actually the eclipse, it will back up into Pisces. And again, it just, with Mercury retrograde especially, and in Pisces, it conjunct Rahu, so the eclipse, and Neptune is there. It is all just too much for the mind to deal with. So you just might not be clear about what's the right thing to do here. And yet still it's happening, right? So this is sort of my tagline for the month of March, really. It's like, nothing is as it seems, but it's all happening perfectly anyway. It's all as it should be. Nothing is as it seems, but it's all as it should be. And that's probably a best approach to the month of March and April for all the signs. But for you, Libra, in terms of your everyday life, work life, relationships, and your love life, and how you're negotiating all of these changes and finding or rebalancing everything, finding that balance once again. Okay, Libra, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and I'll speak to you in April. For Scorpio rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Scorpio, Mars, your ruler, is exalted in Capricorn, your third host sign. This has been the case in February. Now into the first couple of weeks of March, you're feeling the strength of your ruler in exaltation. And so this might be a great time, an empowering time for you, a time of willpower and self-expression. Now, of course, the downside of Mars in your third house exalted is that you overdo it and you beat someone over the head with your opinions. And that's something to be mindful of course, but sometimes maybe you do have to state what you have to state, and that's also there. But just to be mindful of Mars being so strong, it has to come out some way. If you're not saying what you need to say, it might come out in other subversive ways, which you probably wouldn't want, because Mars's subversive ways are usually more accidental, we put it that way. So you blurt it out anyway, and you say something you later regret. So I would say use the energy of Mars into the beginning of March. If you haven't already had that blurting out, which you might have, but if you haven't already blurted something out, then use this energy of Mars to focus your energy and to be very deliberate in what you're saying. And especially like whether it's verbally or not, like whether it's emails or whatever it is, write it down or do whatever, but get it out. That's what I would say. Venus is here with Pluto as well. So there's little chance really for peace in a way, and you have to just say what you have to say. And when you consider that Mars is aspecting the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aries, and that gets closer, and it's already aspecting Jupiter, that's into the beginning of February. That's there. It's already there from the end of February into the beginning of March. But now it's going to start to hone in on Uranus by the 10th of March. That is exact. So, and that is the new moon as well, which I'll show you now. But really, it's kind of culminating. And if you think about conjunctions or aspects that reach a culmination point, it's usually that something happens leading up to that. And then once they do conjunct or aspect by exact degree, then it's kind of like already over. The thing has happened already in many instances. So to think about that, I would say for the first week of March, the first 10 days of March, especially this Mars aspect to Uranus. So let me show you the new moon and you see what I mean. So here we got Mars is exactly aspecting Uranus on the new moon on the 10th of March. The new moon is in Aquarius, which I'll talk about now. But this, again, Mars Uranus conjunction, third house, sixth house, there's some conflict that you're having to deal with here, Scorpio, and you're going to have to communicate something. And at the same time, it might be quite erratic and it might be very surprising. You might surprise yourself. Other people will certainly be surprised. It's Uranus in Aries. It's surprising. It's unexpected. It's rocking the boat and it's creating some problem, somewhere. Sixth house is a problem. But at the same time, Mars is so powerful in dealing with the problem that you're probably going to be able to deal with it as well. And so it brings up the problem, but then you deal with the problem. Now, the problem might also be centered around home life and peace around home life because Venus is now joining Saturn and the new moon on the 10th of March in Aquarius, your fourth house. So these planets are hemmed in between Mars on one side and Rahu on the other. And so Rahu is conjoined Mercury now, which is joined Pisces and Neptune and Rahu on one side and Mars and Pluto on the other. This is really a hemming in situation that is squeezed, that it feels pressurized, that is confusing as hell. Confusing because of Mercury in Pisces conjunct Neptune and Rahu. And at the same time, there's something that's kind of coming to a head here. And this new moon on the 10th of March shows this coming to a head and something has to be dealt with and done. And it might feel like it's forced to be done and it's unexpected. It's forced through and it's like this thing happens. And it could be again around home life. And again, communication will be important here and how you deal with this because Saturn is also your third lord in the fourth house for this new moon in Aquarius. So there's something moving ahead though, because it's a new moon in Aquarius. Something's moving, something's changing in your home life. Absolutely, Scorpio. So to be mindful of that and to keep an eye on the bigger picture and to try and not get too bogged down in the details at this stage anyway. And I mean March and April more so, because in March and April into May, really, Mercury is doing this in and out of Pisces, and it will begin its retrograde in Aries and go back into Pisces. So it's very confused in terms of the details, and especially its conjunction with the eclipse. And the eclipse will happen here in April, the total solar eclipse, after a lunar eclipse in Virgo in your 11th sign on March 25th, which I'll show you now. So not only do we have all of this kind of clustering together of planets and kind of hemming in and squeezing issues and making things feel tense and urgent to do things, but then we have eclipses making it feel even more urgent to make changes, and then unexpected changes come in on top of that. And then on top of that, you have a Mercury retrograde into that mix. Unexpected, also unknowable and unfathomable changes. And it's like you can't figure anything out and your mind is overwhelmed. And then on top of everything else, then you have a comet that is due in our skies at this time in April. So leading into April, Scorpio, there's a lot of change happening in your home life, in working problems out in your home, and looking at what you want to achieve here and what you want to do and what you want to plan for your future and the future and how it's going to affect your relationships moving forward, how it's going to affect you very personally moving forward. We'll see here now as well that Mars is moving into your fourth sign and it's going to put a squeeze on in your fourth house. So while Saturn in your fourth house, it's itself kind of like showing kind of bigger themes and things that have to be dealt with in terms of home and a good focus that is there for sure. That really starts to kick in, I would say, in March. But now Mars is kicking in as well. And that is going to add to this. And when we see the eclipse, then the new moon in April on April 8th, and I'll show you that here as well. This is when Mars and Saturn come together and will really put a squeeze on. So the changes that are happening in your home life is likely to be feeling like it's more forced at this time, I would say, Scorpio. So just be really mindful of that and to be mindful of the relationships you're having at home, that you don't, burn bridges. I would say this could easily happen here. So let me show you first of all the full moon. This is the full moon on the 25th. This is potentially a problem, but it's a problem for everybody unless we deal with the problem, and then it's not a problem because that's the side of Ketu in Virgo. It's seeing the problem and actually being hyper vigilant and very focused in on problems and all the details of all the problems. But then the downside of that with Ketu sometimes can be there's just so many problems that you're focusing on that you just want to throw it up in the air and walk away from it. So obviously the most beneficial expression of this Ketu in Virgo with moon now, a full moon and eclipse moon in Virgo in the 11th house about, your ambition here is that you look at things without overly focusing on all the many problems and the details of those. And you look at things as a way of dealing with problems and deal with them. And that's what Ketu is best for. It's like in Virgo, it's all about getting rid of problems. Instead of getting rid of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it said, just deal with the problem itself or as many problems as you can and not don't walk away from it. If you keep piling up lists and lists and lists of problems, you're going to likely walk away from it. So that's something to be mindful of. It's obviously something to be mindful of in terms of your friendships, your social life, that you might be focusing so much on problems in your social life and your friends, networks, and associations that you don't see any good in them. And again, if you're fault finding all the time, it's not going to benefit your friendships, obviously, but also even in terms of your networks and your ambitions in a higher sense, in terms of a more even career oriented way, like social media, even you might want to just like delete all your social media accounts, or you might get into so many issues with social media that you want to walk away from it. These kinds of examples might not be that exactly for you, but it's all to do with social life, 11th house. So think about that around the full moon, because it might come to a head around the 25th of March. I'm going to show you the 2 weeks later eclipse on the 8th of April. This is in Pisces. As you can see here, Mars, your ruler, is now conjoined almost exact degree Saturn. At the same time, Jupiter is coming together with Uranus almost exact degree. Mercury's retrograde throughout April from the 1st to the 25th. And actually the day after this eclipse on the 8th, it moves into Pisces again. So there's a culmination point here in your 5th house, Virgo, Scorpio. So this is all about, obviously, 5th house is children, is love, is creativity, is also thinking about what you want to plan for your life, your future, what you would love to do, what you enjoy doing. And obviously a new moon and a total solar eclipse here with all the planets either side or conjoined is squeezing all of this into this point now, this pivot point for you, where it's all going to kind of come through. One way or the other, it's going to be pushed through. And it might feel really messy. It might feel really messy in April, May, or sorry, March, April, May, until we get into May really, because Mercury's not going to come out of Pisces until May. So it might feel really messy and overwhelming, and the mind can't grapple with all the details. And also, it doesn't want to deal with all the details, perhaps. And you might want to just throw it all up in the air. But at the same time, it's all coming through. It's all going to come out in the wash, as they say. So this is something to just kind of stick with for the long haul, to not get frustrated with, because that's also potential to not give up on this, because it is going to come through in the end. And to remind yourself of that through all of these many changes that are happening in March and April. So, Scorpio, hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and I'll speak to you in April. So, until next time. For Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So, Sagittarius, your ruler Jupiter is continuing through your 5th host sign, Aries, and will get closer and closer to Uranus throughout March and into April. The exact conjunction is by the end of April. And at this point, by the end of February into the beginning of March, Mars is aspecting Jupiter by exact degree. So you might feel the push here from Mars, and Mars is so powerful in your second sign. So it might be this sense of wanting to push something through, because Mars rules the 5th sign where Jupiter is. It's the 5th sign of enjoyment, of, creativity, of planning something for the future. There might be something here that is important for you that you really want to push through at this point. And, not to say that you shouldn't, Mars certainly wants this, and, you want this. There's always something to have to sacrifice, though, when you think about your 5th Lord also ruling your 12th sign. And when you think about that, thinking about what needs to be surrendered as much, instead of maybe even thinking sacrifice, thinking about to get something that you want, sometimes you have to surrender what you want to get what you want. It's like, to give to get something, right? And so there is an important consideration here in getting that balance right, I would say. And to consider the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aries through March and April now, as it leads to this culmination, I would say. Oftentimes it's the culmination that, feels like it might show something happening, but oftentimes it's actually the leading up to that conjunction that brings about that thing. And the culmination point, yes, is the conjunction, but then it's already in the waning cycle, right? So perhaps there's this kind of March, April period where something comes out where if you expect, something, I would say positive, because this is generally a more positive conjunction of Jupiter Uranus for people generally, and more especially probably for you, Sagittarius, because it's in your fifth house sign, which is about enjoyment. So fun and enjoyment, love and good times, something that is there to be enjoyed for sure. Now, again, just as with all the signs, there are caveats here, and the caveats are many because of the other conjunctions that are happening in March and April. And the other conjunctions aren't as easeful as this one. And as easeful as Jupiter and Uranus is, by the way, it doesn't mean that they're not surprising as hell and it's like you didn't expect that thing. It's just that maybe it's a positive surprise, a very nice surprise. Where we have Jupiter and Uranus conjunct, we also have Mars and Venus to begin the month, and then we have Mars and Saturn by the end of the month and into April. And the April new moon, that especially important April new moon, a total solar eclipse in Pisces, where all the planets gather between Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries, all heading in all the planets in Pisces. So that's an important juncture and like switching up point where it's like obviously there's some changes happening here in terms of your home life and all of these plans that you're making and all these things that you want to do. When you think about the third and the fifth house, either side of the fourth, third and fifth is very much about what you want. And there's something here that you want, and that's putting the squeeze on your home life, perhaps, and your happiness. So there's something important here that you want that is going to obviously impact your happiness and your home life. So, but before we get to any of that, of course, we have a new moon in your third sign on the 10th of March. Let me show you that first of all. So this is the new moon, 10th of March, conjoined Saturn, the ruler of the third, and now Venus also has moved in. And again, you can see here, there's also a kind of squeeze here because we have a new moon with Saturn and Venus hemmed in between Mars and Rahu. Mars and Pluto, in fact, and Rahu, Mercury now, and Neptune on the other side. So there's a confusing situation potentially happening here that's very sketchy on the details. And everything feels a bit sort of squeezed. And at the same time, it feels like you have to do something or something is, forced upon you in some way, or there's time running out or something. There's always a time element in terms of Saturn. And anytime we have a Saturn configuration, and especially a new moon in Saturn sign conjoined Saturn. So third house is very much about like travel as well, but it's again anything that you want. It's about going for something and being able to grab it, and get it. And I think again there could be some shift around this here about going for something that you want. Again, it might feel like it's a squeeze here with all these planets either side, but it's still a time to go for what you want. Now, within this new lunar month, of course, we have an eclipse by the end of March, on March 25th, which I'll show you now. And that starts a whole period of change in another way, because it could be so easy with everything that's going on this side of the zodiac and all of these things that you want and planning and all of these home issues that you're thinking about, that you completely forget about work. So it's important, obviously, not to do that. And the other side of that is to be really focused on work. Ketu in Virgo can be absolutely focused and hyper focused and like laser beam focused. The issue there, I guess, is that maybe it's focusing on problems at work. And of course, if you're focusing so much on problems in your work and you're pointing out all the many problems, then you're likely to maybe not do anything about them if there's just too much of a long list. But that's something to be mindful of in general, and especially around this full moon and a partial lunar eclipse on the 25th of March. It's sort of reaching a culmination point here as well, but it could also reach a resolution in terms of whatever problems you are dealing with at work. And again, the better side of this would be, Ketu pointing out some problems and then getting rid of them. Ketu does a good job of getting rid of things. So best get rid of problems, then look at all the many problems that might be there and then feel overwhelmed by it and then want to just throw it all up in the air and walk away. Because Mercury, which rules this full moon, is in Pisces this whole while. And it's at the very last degree of Pisces for the full moon and eclipse. and about to move into Aries. So it kind of itself feels like the mind is a bit overwhelmed and not able to figure things out here at this point. So it could easily again show that kind of wanting to throw things up in the air and walk away from it. So just think about that by the end of March, I would say, and to consider whether that's a good tactic or not. I want to show you the eclipse 2 weeks after this because it's important. It's a new moon, a total solar eclipse in Pisces. All the other planets are on either side or gathered with the new moon in Pisces. Again, everything feels a bit squeezed and maybe tense, but also this tension can be used in a more positive way to get something done. Either way, I think things are going to start happening in a big way. Big changes are afoot here for sure in Pisces. So home life, of course, is going to be impacted here. You know, it's obviously incorporating so many other factors of your life in here, and it was all of the other rulers of all the other signs are gathering here or either side of this. So even though it might be impacting your home life and your happiness, it's not necessarily just about home, right? It's about everything that's happening in your life, culminating at this point and this reset point on April 8th. Together with an eclipse, we also happen to have more than likely a visible comet appearing in our skies at this time and in this section of the zodiac, by the way. So it just shows that there's some big changes afoot here in your home life and how that's going to impact your whole life in a sense moving forward, and how to make plans moving forward now is important because, of course, Jupiter again is conjoining Uranus. Those surprise events, twists and turns are going to happen together with this eclipse, and to be really kind of focused in your energy. And you can see here the Mars-Saturn conjunction almost exact at this point as well in your third sign. It is a good place to put these planets. Mars and Saturn do well in the third because it's just about doing what you need to do and putting more effort in and focus and challenging you to do what you need to do to get what you want to get and to get where you want to get as well. So all of this is kind of like coming to a sort of head in a way by April. And I thought I'd mention it now in March, even though we're not into April. I'll talk about it, of course, more in April forecast, but it's definitely giving you a heads up now because of that full moon on March 25th and opening that 2 week period of the eclipses where it creates all of these uncertainties and urgencies that lead to these changes that are likely to happen by April. All the while, Mercury is going to retrograde and go back into Pisces the day after the eclipse. So it's not going to get out of Pisces until May. So really, March and April are confusing as hell. Let me put it to you straight. So, and that's because of Mercury and Pisces. It's not just Mercury and Pisces, it's conjunct Neptune and the North Node Rahu, and it's conjunct Rahu twice and will station on Rahu by the time it stations on the 25th of April. So things are not clear around all of these things. And I'm telling you that just because just to be mindful of it so that you're not trying to get everything clear straight away, that this period is probably better used in just thinking about the bigger picture and doing what you can right now without getting too bogged down in the details. Only focus on things that you can work with and deal with and change in whatever way you can. Try not to get bogged down in all the many things that are happening now because the mind will become overwhelmed. A Mercury retrograde in Pisces is an overwhelmed mind. So thinking about that is probably a better way to approach the next few weeks. And the next few weeks are going to bring up lots of changes, of course, a lot of personal changes for you, Sagittarius, but they're necessary and they're absolutely ultimately for your betterment. It's going to help your life. It's going to improve your life. You just have to maybe kind of get out your own way in this case and just kind of think about that bigger picture and to think about the thing that is inspiring you to move forward and think about Jupiter's placement in Aries this whole while pushing you forward, like inspiring you, moving you forward. It's a lot more positive for you, I think, more so than a lot of signs, Sagittarius. So consider that in terms of whatever challenges come their way, that you're able to navigate them and think about that bigger picture. So by Sagittarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and I'll speak to you in April. So until next time. For Capricorn rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Capricorn, your ruler Saturn is combust. It's together with the Sun and Mercury in your second whole sign, Aquarius, in the sign of family, of food, of finances, of values, fixed assets, things that make you feel safe, all the things that make you feel safe. And of course, Saturn being combust can show some issues around these things, like it doesn't mean that it's a challenge in a sense that they're not there. It's just that you might be focusing on them so much that you might be losing perspective of them. We cannot see Saturn right now, and when we cannot see Saturn, we often cannot see the consequences, obviously, therefore, of our action. And so Saturn is very much about action in a way as well. When we think about Saturn, we think about karma. Literally, the word means action. And I think to think about, your diet plan, your family dynamics, your financial life, your values, to consider these, I guess, in the context of a Saturn combustion is to consider the deeper meanings of these things, even if they're not obviously outwardly presenting themselves in any way as such. It's just this deeper insight, maybe with the combustion, this deeper awareness of what is of value to you, what's of true value to you, what's important to you. Together with Mercury, of course, it shows that this is really the focus. And with all of these planets here and the new moon coming up on the 10th of March, and then all of these planets for the new moon in Aquarius hemmed in between Mars in your sign on one side and Pluto, and then Rahu, Neptune, as well as Mercury by the new moon on the other. So let me show you that here. That's the new moon on the 10th. Venus has also joined the new moon, so it just leaves Mars and Pluto in your sign, and Rahu and Neptune, Mercury on the other side of this new moon in your second. So obviously this is a reset point in terms of family and finances and all of these things, diet also, all of these things. So a new moon, a new lunar month in terms of dealing with these issues. Saturn is here, of course, the ruler, so it's going to get you to focus on them, and you can't really avoid them in a sense, and maybe there's a squeeze on to have to deal with them. So any kind of family issues, I would say, or financial issues have to be dealt with at this point. Mars, again, like I said, and Pluto on one side, and Rahu and Neptune, Mercury on the other, can show a kind of, again, further squeeze on this issue. So it might feel like there's a being forced into something. To make sure that with Mars, especially running through your rising sign for the first couple of weeks of March, as you've been feeling in February, could really make this kind of feel like pushed, like you might feel pushed into something. Also, its aspect onto your fourth house might feel like emotionally, you might feel like aggravated by something or frustrated by some home situation. To really be mindful of not feeling pushed around, I would say, at this time, or pushed into making decisions about things that aren't very clear as well, potentially, because Mercury is also now stepping into Pisces and conjoin Neptune and then Rahu, and that's creating a lot of confusion in terms of your everyday life and travel plans and all of these things. It doesn't mean that it's not a good time to travel. Mercury in the third house can certainly be enjoyable and all of that, but it obviously always brings up unforeseen circumstances. And then when you add in an eclipse by April in this sign, and then Mercury retrograding back into this sign in April as well, it will start its retrograde in Aries and then go back into Pisces. It's not clear, obviously, and I think to be okay with not being clear about the details, especially if you're traveling, because of course Mercury rules your ninth house and it's transiting through your third house in Pisces, conjunct Neptune and Rahu. So there's a lot of lack of clarity here, and the mind can be overwhelmed by all of the details and not be clear about the details. And at the same time, there's this need to travel or to do something or to think about something more deeply or to engage with someone or, something. Third and ninth house is very much activated because of the eclipses throughout this period in March, April. So you might be thinking a lot about things and traveling, and traveling makes you think about things as well. As it gives you a different perspective on your life. And with the eclipses here, it's obviously going to shake things up and also bring more insights into your life. So definitely a kind of a deep thinking kind of period for you, Capricorn, and as well as it kind of push on to get some changes made and changes just happening anyway or being forced to happen, while also maybe potentially the mind being sort of overwhelmed with all the changes that are happening. And as I'll show you with the eclipse in April, it's all kind of leading to this kind of culmination point in a way by the 8th of April, which is again an eclipse, a total solar eclipse, and a new moon, in other words, and also a comet, which is apparently going to appear in our skies at that time. So we have an eclipse of the sun, a total solar eclipse, and then a comet appearing. So it definitely shows change that's happening in this sector of your chart. And the third house, again, is all about traveling, thinking, everyday thinking, and dealing with other people. And it's kind of very much about moving about. you know, so kind of thinking about this moving and toing and froing thing in your chart, and how that has to change in some way. Now, the other changes that are happening, of course, are happening in your fourth house, in your home, because Jupiter and Uranus are coming together by the end of April. So it's kind of reaching a culmination point throughout March and April. And Mars's aspect from your sign to this configuration obviously shows more need for change or push on change or doing something here. And Mars rules the fourth house, of course, of home. So there could be some things that are changing here in terms of plans that you're making in your home life. Maybe it's just planning to do some changes in your home, or maybe it's bigger changes at home. But whatever it is, there's some changes happening here, and unexpected changes as well, because it's Jupiter, Uranus. But that doesn't mean it's bad. That could mean actually that it's a good thing. It's a positive change. It's Jupiter after all. Because Jupiter rules the eclipse, where the eclipse occurs on April 8th, though, we can consider that this is obviously showing some unexpected change that has unforeseeable consequences at this point that you cannot fathom, right? This is the whole thing with Pisces. But again, the positive expression of that is that you have these great insights into things by having these different kinds of experiences with these different kinds of people while you're traveling or doing something, that it just alters your way of looking at the world. So let me show you the next major lunation. So that's the new moon. It's an important new moon conjunct Saturn. Again, putting the squeeze on, like things have to change here. And the change happens and starts to really happen by the 25th, where we have a full moon in your ninth sign conjunct Ketu in Virgo. Now, as I've been saying to all the signs, this could be where there's this fault finding with Ketu in Virgo, and at the same time, maybe not dealing with the faults. That would be the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario with Ketu and Virgo is seeing all the many faults, being really critical of everything, and then dropping them and walking away because there's just too much to deal with. I couldn't be bothered dealing with all of that. It's too much. The most positive expression, I suppose, of Ketu is seeing some faults and for the sole purpose of dealing with them and dealing with them effectively, and like laser beam sort of focus, get rid of them. So that's probably a better expression of Ketu and Virgo. Now, obviously, that's going to swing widely from person to person, but the full moon and the partial lunar eclipse in Virgo with Ketu conjoined in the ninth house, all obviously again about travel, but also about the father relationship and about philosophy and beliefs and principles. Thinking about, again, these deeper things, higher minded things, we might say. Things are being revealed at this point. It's an eclipse after all. It's bringing insights. So allow the insights to bubble up into your awareness and to think about them deeply without neglecting or rejecting whatever needs to be done, because something has to be done. Some change has to happen. Now, you might not actually have to do anything necessarily. Eclipses often show that just things are happening and that's it. You're just an observer. But that might be a better piece of advice than like heaping on more change upon change upon change, right? Because you already see that there's eclipses happening. There's these squeeze on with all these planets culminating, coming together. There's a Mercury retrograde and moving back and in and out of Pisces. And this actually, Mercury rules this full moon. It's about to step out of Pisces and go into Aries and then retrograde in April and go back into Pisces and join the next eclipse. There's just too much going on, too much change. The mind could be completely boggled down, boggled with all of this change that's happening. And so it's probably not a good idea to make more changes on top of that, if possible. Only do the things that you have to do, I would say, and make the changes that have to be made. And try not to add more and more onto an already exhausted, probably mind at this point. Mercury, you can see here, is at the very last degree of Pisces by the 25th of March. Very end of the sign is kind of at the end of its rope. Mercury is about the mind trying to figure out, trying to grasp some sort of sense of what's happening here. And it's confused. It's really confused because of Neptune and Rahu. It will the day after then go into Aries. But then, like I said, in April, we'll start to retrograde from the 1st of April to the 25th and go back within that period into Pisces and conjoin the eclipse. So let me show you the eclipse first of all. This is the eclipse in your third sign, the new moon total solar eclipse on the 8th of April. I'll talk about it more, of course, in April, but I want to highlight it now because that full moon on the March 25th is opening up that 2-week eclipse period. That's really important to negotiate because eclipse periods, those 2 weeks between the two eclipses, always feel more urgent, always feel like more intense, that something is pushed through, something has to happen, and we all feel this urgency to do something. I would just step back from that a bit, because this is not necessarily the most conducive to being very clear about whatever it is happening. Mercury again is retrograde during this period. It's hemmed, hemmed in between all these planets, but it itself is just moving between this juncture between Pisces and Aries. You can see the day after it goes back into Pisces. So it's just not clear. And then you have these conjunctions of Mars and Saturn, and then Jupiter and Uranus, and all these planets gathering in Pisces. So these planets are hemming all these planets in Pisces, all hemmed in three signs. Everything just feels very squeezed right now. And so again, in terms of finances, family, travel, and home life, this is where it's all happening for you, Capricorn. So consider these things more carefully, I would say. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't do anything, because things have to be done. Everything feels a bit squeezed at this point, where it might feel like there's no choice, actually. But I would say maybe just don't add more and more onto the pile of things that are changing already. And again, because of that Mercury retrograde into April, where things aren't very clear, the details are just not forthcoming. There's lots of positive things happening here as well, but again, the family dynamics might be feeling more of the pinch of Saturn Mars, whereas the home life and the changes, the unexpected changes that are happening in your home life with Jupiter Uranus, I think would be more positive ultimately. It's just, understanding that there's some hidden dynamics here that you cannot really fathom at this point, and you will work out subsequently, I'm sure. So, Capricorn, I hope that's been of help. I wish you all the best for the month of March. I'll speak to you again in April when we talk more about that Mercury retrograde and the eclipse. And until next time. For Aquarius rising and or moon sign for March 2024. Aquarius, your ruler Saturn is in your sign. It is conjunct the sun, also in your sign, your seventh lord. So therefore Saturn is combust along with Mercury, which is quite often combust, but Saturn is less combust. It's only once a year. This might be a time where you're feeling a bit sort of burnt out in many ways. At the same time, Saturn is so strong in its own sign at home that, no better place to be feeling a bit run down or burnt out than just being at home and just recuperating at home and enjoying some home time. And also at home in yourself in a sense as well, because Saturn is at home in its sign and in your first sign. So it's very much about you at home in yourself, and maybe having those, hours at home spent figuring out, you and what you're about. This is again a theme anyway of Saturn moving through your sign for the last year and till next year. It does it for 2.5 years. So obviously this is a whole period of building yourself up, and in many, very many ways. And it's just that the combustion, a brief thing that happens into the middle of March, might make you just feel a bit less energetic. It's something to be mindful of in a general sense. Now, at the same time, we have what's happening is that Mars and Venus and Pluto on one side are hemming in Saturn, and Rahu and Neptune on the other. So Mercury will conjoin Rahu and Neptune as well, and then Venus will move into your sign. So you have Mars and Rahu either side of all these planets. And you can see here by the new moon in your sign, because it's a new moon in your sign on the 10th, that there's a whole new beginning here. Obviously, any new moon in any given year in your sign is a new beginning, but especially when Saturn is present. So it's a new moon in Aquarius with Saturn, the ruler, in your sign. So this is a new beginning for you personally. And I think that this is really important to take note of on the 10th of March, to plan for this. Again, it might feel there's a squeeze on because of Mars, Pluto on one side, and then Mercury, Neptune, and Rahu on the other. One side, Mars, Pluto, is like, this push in a way that's maybe even pushing you, not consciously, but still pushing you into doing things. And on the other side, Rahu, Neptune, and Mercury is just not very clear about the details and even the financial aspects. And certainly finances are a big part of this 12th second house engagement, because 12th house is like savings, or 12th house is expenditure, second house is savings. You obviously going to have to think about these things in terms of those kinds of issues, for example. But it could also just mean energy expenditure. Again, considering Saturn in your sign combust the sun and this new moon, this reset point where you're negotiating your own energy levels even, and thinking about like how much, like this give and take that has to happen here, I suppose. Venus, a very important planet for you, has joined the new moon. That's an important one for the coming month as well. So that's kind of smoothing over a lot here, and I think it could lead to a lot of enjoyable moments as well in the coming month from the 10th of March. You can see here that Jupiter and Uranus are coming together as well. They'll come together by April 20th by exact degree, and then Mars will move into your sign as well, and as the sun moves into Pisces. So here you can see, we just bring it into your sign, that the sun is moving into Pisces mid-month as it does every year. Mars then pretty much soon after moves into your sign, and then you have this formation of all of these conjunctions that are starting to take hold really by mid-March and into the end of March and beginning of April. They kind of solidify all the more. And what happens with conjunctions is that oftentimes we feel the lead up to the conjunction itself, where something's got to give by the time they conjoin. And that's kind of like, in a way, that's the pivot point and the change. But actually, we're feeling it the whole time as it's leading to that. And we actually might have things happen in your life leading up to the conjunction. So obviously this Saturn-Mars conjunction in your sign is something to pay attention to, with the conjunctions in your second sign and the upcoming new moon in April and a total solar eclipse in your second sign, with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in your third sign. There's a lot hinging here on your second sign in terms of what's happening for you personally and what you want to go for. That's first and third sign, and how all that kind of puts the squeeze on your financial life and also family dynamics. So second sign is about the assets that you have to, do whatever it is you want to do. The third house is what you want to do. So obviously there's a dynamic here about you negotiating with yourself and other people, perhaps in communicating something to be able to get something going here. And it does suggest, though, that there's some positive outcome here, because Jupiter Uranus especially is like a more positive, unexpected development. And then the second house eclipse with all these planets gathering into April, it does show uncertainty, but and lack of details maybe because of Mercury here in Pisces especially. But it also shows the potential for a new insight, a new beginning, a new financial phase of your life, I would say. So obviously, Aquarius, this is an important time for you personally, and in terms of what sustains you very personally, but also more, even especially professionally. Because when you think about all of these planets, it's not just about you, yourself personally, or your finances, your bank balance, and what it is you want to pursue. It's all of these planets gathered here. So everything, your relationships, your work life, your everything is involved in this kind of configuration where they're all coming together. So I'll show you the full moon first, which is a lunar eclipse. It's on the 25th of March, and this starts out the whole period of major changes. I mean, there already are changes afoot here, but this really starts up some bigger changes going on into April. So 25th of March is an important full moon in Hasta, the middle of Virgo. Is very efficient and dexterous lunar mansion in Virgo. Ketu is even more so hyper vigilant, perhaps even of problems here that might be developing. So the downside of Ketu in Virgo is just being so focused on problems. And in the eighth house, there can be some problems. And especially around finances, again, because of the second, eighth houses impacted here, it could be some financial issues. And with your partner, there might be some issues here, or family dynamics going on, family money and things like that, and partner and all of this. Eighth house is also just unforeseeable circumstances. So Ketu is hyper vigilant all the time, looking for the problem. But the thing is, making sure that you're dealing with the problem as you find them. That's a better expression of Ketu in the eighth house. The worst expression of Ketu in the eighth house is actually completely neglecting these things, seeing that there are problems and then walking away from them. And the eighth house is like, even deeper still, maybe even problems from the past, like traumas that are arising again that you're wanting to get rid of, that are creating problems in your present that you could, do with addressing. That's Ketu in the eighth house. Ketu in the eighth house can sometimes show not addressing those issues. So this full moon obviously is going to stir up all of these issues because it's an eclipse. And it'll give you great insights into what's going on here, into the financial dynamics, if that's the practical thing that's happened, or family dynamics, or the in-laws you're dealing with, or any other entity that maybe that you're connected to financially. It could also be money coming from other bodies, like government bodies or regulatory bodies or something like loans or grants or inheritances or whatever. Eighth house is money coming to you from other means. So there could be something here. It could be some insight into this dynamic. But what's happening then 2 weeks later, as you'll see, is we have this new moon on the 8th of April in your second sign of finances, of family, of values, of self-worth as well. And considering that in a deeper sense is important here. Now, there's obviously some major changes afoot here for this new moon total solar eclipse on April 8th. And I'm mentioning it now in March because it's so important, because it's obviously been started by the full moon in March, on March 25th. And so it's a whole reset point. You can see here the conjunctions of Saturn and Mars coming to a head. You can see the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming to a head. You can see the Mercury retrograde in the third sign backing up into your second sign the day after this eclipse. So the returning to the details, back to the drawing board, maybe going back to figure out the details or trying to figure out all the changes that have been happening and continue to happen here, that it just feels all kind of like squeezed at this point where the mind might be completely overwhelmed by trying to figure all of this out. It might be hard to fathom what's happening here. And you cannot know it all, but you can obviously be mindful of this kind of crossroads that this culmination leads to and the changes that it's inevitably going to lead to, and that you don't get too bogged down in the details at this point and you deal with what you can practically, but you recognize that there's just so much happening that you need to kind of let the dust settle really after this whole period of the eclipse and after the Mercury retrograde, really, because Mercury doesn't station until the 25th of April, and it will do so right conjunct Rahu, exactly conjunct Rahu on the 25th of April. So there's still a lot to work out, is what I'm saying, financially and in every other which way for you personally, while yourself, you might be feeling very empowered as well with Mars moving through your sign conjunct Saturn, your ruler. But it also might just feel a lot of tension professionally, where there's this kind of, push on for doing something and, a lot of financial issues to work out to be able to do that thing. So lots going on in March and into April. I'll talk more about the eclipse, of course, in April and the Mercury retrograde next month. Hope you got something from that. And until next time. For Pisces rising and or moon sign for March 2024. So Pisces, Jupiter, your ruler, is in Aries, and it will get closer and closer to Uranus in Aries. And by the end of April, we'll come to an exact conjunction. And this has obviously been building for some time. And with conjunctions, and there are many other conjunctions happening at this time, which I'll show you, there is often this sense of things building and building and building and things happening actually prior to the exact conjunction. And then once they do conjunct, it's like over already. It's like it's pivoted into a different thing. So that's something just to be mindful of, that the next few weeks in March, April, I think are going to lead to some changes, and to think about those changes as positive as well, because Jupiter Uranus can be very positive. It could be unexpected, but still positive. And because Jupiter rules your sign and your 10th house sign, which is very much about career and life direction, essentially, and it's doing that in your second sign of community, family, and finances, there could be some developments here around that. And just again, to think about it in a positive way, to keep an open mind about it and to expect something good in a way. At the same time, there are other conjunctions that are putting a squeeze on in another way. There could be some issues here in being able to let go of what needs to be let go of. Surrendering really is as much a part of what you're about anyway, Pisces. So with all of these conjunctions as well in your 12th sign, which is very much about surrendering, surrendering even your will. Mars is about to move into your 12th sign and conjoin Saturn. Surrendering some ambition that you've had, or just whatever it is that you're surrendering, or even surrendering a friendship, or whatever practical thing you are letting go of at this time. It's the surrender itself actually that can actually make it happen more easily than just trying to push it through all the time. Even though it might feel like there's a big push on to make things happen in March and April, and there is, because they're doing so in this kind of culmination into your 12th and then moving into your first sign into April, there's this kind of need to kind of end something and or surrender something to allow something to come into your life and to start over. And that April period, especially with a new moon in your sign on April 8th, a total solar eclipse, after a partial lunar eclipse in your seventh sign on March 25th, is showing obviously there's a lot of changes happening behind the scenes that you're not even aware of. So there's a lot of changes happening in the more obvious front row seat, but then there's all these other changes happening in the back end of things and the sort of behind the scenes, behind the curtain, as it were. So to be mindful of that is at least to be aware of the need for change in April or March and April, and at the same time to not have to kind of figure it all out. And the reason for that is because of Mercury. Mercury's about to move into Pisces and will stay there for a long time in March, April into May. And it will retrograde in April and move back into Pisces from Aries. So there's a lot of kind of working things out and trying to figure things out subsequently with Mercury. And Mercury in Pisces can sometimes feel a bit overwhelmed. And when you add this into the mix of the eclipse, obviously there's a lot of change happening for you personally and in your relationships and at home. So if you, again, consider all of these changes that are happening and you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, you don't have to get too bogged down in the issues, like the day-to-day details in a way, but you just deal with what you can and what you are aware of and what you can work with in more practical ways. Eclipses aren't always the most practical time, and I'll show you how both eclipses are influenced by Mercury, and Mercury is doing some funky things during both eclipses. So it's just the mind is probably not going to be able to figure things out that well at this time. But before we get there, I want to just show you the new moon on the 10th. So the new moon is in Aquarius in your 12th sign. Mercury has now moved into Pisces, leaving the sun and moon, the new moon. Saturn and Venus has joined it in Aquarius, your 12th sign. But this places now the new moon between Mars and Pluto on one side, and then Mercury, Neptune, and Rahu in your sign on the other, creating a very confused situation, I would say. And so again, because this is a reset point in your 12th house, it's about surrendering something and starting over. And at the same time, it might feel like there's some sort of push on to do something, but in a way, surrendering isn't a choice, really. It's not something you can do, really. It's not like it's like telling somebody, go to sleep now. You know, you don't sleep like in that way. You just allow sleep to come. So that's something to be mindful of in getting this balance right in terms of how you need to, like, this push pull could feel a bit sort of like there's something to negotiate here, right? Mars is still very powerful right through the first couple of weeks of March in your 11th whole sign, putting the push on all of these issues, family issues, financial issues, all of these issues kind of coming to a head in another way. And this kind of frustration that can build there if things aren't moving as fast as you want. But then that combined with all of these unforeseeable circumstances and changes that you are going through yourself personally with Rahu, Neptune, and now Mercury, you know, not being able to fathom actually what's going on, and how maybe your partner might not be able to fathom what's going on with you personally. All of this kind of makes these changes in your 12th house, what you need to let go of, kind of more urgent in a way. And in a way, those urgencies kind of build in intensity by the eclipse by the end of the month. So that's the next lunation I'll show you by the 25th. This is let me put it back to your sign. So this is the full moon and partial lunar eclipse in Virgo conjoined Ketu, the south node, in your seventh whole sign, all about relationships. This starts this period of eclipses, a 2-week period until we have the eclipse on the 8th of April in your sign. So obviously, Pisces, there's changes happening in your relationship. Ketu in Virgo is, on the one hand, really good at picking out faults, but on the other hand, it can also not deal with them. And that's probably the worst expression of Ketu in Virgo. The best expression would be to see the problem and then get rid of it. And another better expression of Ketu would probably be in relationship contexts anyway, a deepening of your relationship with your partner. Now, of course, there's an issue here because Mercury, which rules this, is in your sign and it's a bit lost at sea there. It doesn't really understand what's going on. So there might be some really, poor communication. There might be some lack of clarity and there might be some confusion on both parts. And then Mercury on this particular lunation, the full moon and eclipse, is at the very last degree of Pisces. So it's about to move into Aries. So it's a very confused mind here and conjunct all of these eclipses and all of this. So it just might not be clear right now. And again, to be mindful of that around this full moon on the 25th of March is to kind of take a step back and, not to overreact and not to be too impulsive about anything. And if you are, to kind of accept that in yourself and not to criticize yourself or to criticize your partner if they are the one being impulsive, and to see that actually is all meant to happen in this way anyway. And that's probably a better way to approach this. As you can see here, like the Mercury moves into Aries the day after this eclipse. And then 2 weeks later, I'll show you the actual eclipse that happens in your sign. So this is an eclipse in Pisces on the 8th of April, a total solar eclipse. You can see here that Mercury has gone through a retrograde now. It starts on the 1st of April, actually, and it will continue and go back into Pisces and not finish until the 25th of April. So there's a lot more details to work out yet. And again, that's for you more personally about home life and relationships, Pisces. But because it's doing it in your sign and in your second sign, it's very much about how it's impacting you personally and how it's impacting your family, even your finances. Lots of things to work out here. So be patient with it, I would say. This is an important eclipse. Obviously, it's a total solar eclipse. It's in your sign. You only get it once a year, a solar eclipse in your sign, that is, when there is eclipses going on every 19 years or so. So it only happens every 19 years, in other words. Basically, this is a big period of change for you. And with all these other planets hemming in all these planets, the sun, moon, the Venus, the Mercury, about to move back in, Mars and Saturn on one side, Jupiter, Uranus on the other, coming to an exact conjunction around this time. It's all coming to a head by the beginning of April. And I'm mentioning it now in March because even though it hasn't happened yet, it's leading to this. And like I said, with conjunctions, it often has this feel of things happen before the actual exact conjunction. And by that time, the conjunction itself shows it's like it's already changing again. It's shifting into something else. The winds are shifting again, and the course is changing. So to be really mindful of this, Pisces, is to be mindful of the changes that you are going through, but all your life, all the people in your life are going through. And of course, because you are going through so much changes, your relationships to all these people are going through changes, including your partner, everybody in your life, really. And how these are necessary, and to surrender what you need to, especially with Mars and Saturn in your 12th now, to let go of anything that is not for you so that you can be more of you, like stepping into yourself, like becoming more of who you really are, essentially. And to allow eclipses to bring that to the forefront more so, and to not get too bogged down in trying to work everything else out for everybody else, because you are going through so many personal changes. It would be a waste of time and energy, and a shame, really, in a way, not to make the most of these kinds of personal changes that you're going through by being present with them, by sitting quietly with them, and especially around the eclipses themselves leading up to this 8th of April period. Okay, Pisces, that's a lot. That's enough to talk about in any one month. It's a lot going on. I wish you all the best, of course, for this. I'll talk more about the eclipse in April, as well as the Mercury retrograde. All the best for the month, and until next time.